Hi guys, tonight we arrive together at the edge of something unfamiliar. You stand in a clearing, just as the light drains from the sky, the air already sharpening around your cheeks. There is no switch to flip and no hum of a heater starting up. The cold is not a background detail, it is a presence. You can almost hear it breathing. Somewhere in the trees, wood contracts with a soft pop, and you realize that warmth is no longer a given. It is a task, it is work. And if you fail, you probably will not survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you are settling in, feel free to tell me where you are listening from and what time it is there. Now dim the lights and stay with that fading glow as the story keeps moving forward. You are an early settler now, standing where the land does not care about your plans. The first lesson comes quickly. Cold is not dramatic like a storm. It is patient. It seeps in through boots, through seams, through breath. A mainstream historical fact that still surprises people is that many early colonial deaths were not from violence or wild animals, but from exposure during the first winters. The cold simply waited. As you walk toward the rough shelter you have thrown together, the ground crunches faintly. Frost already claims the grass. You can smell damp earth, raw wood, and the faint metallic tang of cold air. Your fingers feel thick and clumsy, like they no longer belong to you. Historians still argue whether early settlers truly understood how dangerous cold exposure was, or whether familiarity with seasonal chill made them underestimate it until it was too late. Inside your shelter, the space feels smaller than you remember. Walls made from logs or packed mud hold the day's warmth only briefly. The roof creaks softly as temperatures drop. You realize something unsettling. Fire alone will not save you. Many newcomers assumed a flame meant safety. In reality, early settlers learned that shelter mattered just as much, sometimes more. Wind steals heat faster than darkness ever could. There is a quiet moment where you listen to your own breathing. It sounds loud in the small space, slow, careful. You stamp your feet not out of impatience but instinct. Movement creates warmth. Stillness invites the cold to settle into your bones. Somewhere nearby, another family is doing the same thing, though you cannot see them. Isolation feels colder than the air itself. A quirky detail that shows how desperate people could be comes from diaries describing settlers rubbing animal fat directly onto their skin before bed. It smelled awful, attracted pests, and felt unpleasant, but it reduced heat loss. Comfort was negotiable, survival was not. You wrinkle your nose just imagining it, grateful that for now your story is only being told. You think about night coming fully. Darkness in this era is complete. No streetlights, no glowing screens, only the fire you have yet to build, and even that will not last forever. Firewood already feels precious, each log a promise and a countdown. You can almost feel tomorrow's anxiety stacking itself neatly beside tonight's fatigue. Outside, the wind changes direction. You hear it before you feel it slipping through gaps you did not know were there. It carries the smell of snow, even if snow itself has not arrived. Early settlers learned to read these signs with the seriousness of sailors reading the sea. Weather law mattered. A sudden shift could mean the difference between an uncomfortable night and a deadly one. You pull your clothing tighter around yourself. Wool scratches faintly. Linen feels thin. Every layer matters. Clothing is not fashion here. It is architecture for the body. A known historical truth is that wool remained warm even when damp, which made it invaluable. Settlers prized it not for softness, but for mercy. As you settle down, the sounds of the land change. Daybirds fall silent. Night insects begin their thin, persistent chorus. Cold sharpens sound, making every snap of a twig feel closer than it should. Your shelter smells of fresh-cut wood and earth. The scent is grounding, almost calming if you let it be. There is no dramatic moment where you conquer the cold. Instead, there is endurance. Small choices stack up. Where you stand, how you move, what you save for later. Scholars still debate whether early settlers adapted primarily through borrowed indigenous knowledge or through brutal trial and error. But standing here, you suspect the answer is an uneasy mix of both. You lie down, not yet to sleep, just to rest. The ground presses cold through whatever separates you from it. You shift, searching for the least punishing position. This is the first night of many like it. You do not know that yet, but your body senses it. Muscles tighten, breath slows. Outside, winter waits politely. Inside, you prepare to meet it one night at a time, learning that warmth is not a luxury, but a relationship you must constantly tend. You wake before dawn, not because you are rested, but because the cold has crept too close to your thoughts. Sleep here is lighter, thinner. Your breath fogs the air in front of your face, even inside the shelter. The fire you imagined last night never happened, not yet. Instead, the first lesson presses itself into your awareness. Shelter comes before flame. You sit up slowly, careful not to waste energy. The floor beneath you is hard, unyielding, and cold enough to sting through thin layers. Early settlers learned quickly that fire without protection is like pouring water into sand. Heat vanishes unless something holds it. A well-built shelter traps warmth, the way cupped hands trap breath. That understanding did not come easily. A mainstream historical fact often overlooked is that many early colonial homes had very small interiors by modern standards. This was not poverty alone. Smaller spaces meant less air to warm, less heat lost. You look around and realize the tightness of this place is not a flaw, it is strategy. You run your hand along the wall. The surface is rough, uneven, still smelling of sap and damp soil. Gaps stare back at you, dark and thin. Wind loves gaps. Cold finds them instinctively. You feel a faint draft brush your knuckles. It feels like a warning. Today will not be about comfort. It will be about sealing yourself off from the outside world. Settlers quickly discovered that building against the wind mattered as much as building strong walls. A house placed carelessly on high ground might look impressive, but it froze faster. Lower ground tree cover, even natural rises in the earth, could mean the difference between tolerable cold and relentless exposure. Historians still argue whether this knowledge was common sense or hard-won experience, but journals suggest many learned the lesson only after suffering through brutal nights. You step outside briefly, pulling your clothing close. The morning air bites harder now. Your shelter looks fragile in the pale light. Smoke curls from a neighbour's roof, thin and hopeful. You smell it sharp and comforting. That scent carries promise, but it also reminds you that fire demands fuel, attention, and constant care. Shelter asks for work too, but once done, it keeps working even while you sleep. A quirky but telling detail from early accounts describes settlers hanging extra animal hides along interior walls, not for decoration, but to block drafts. The hides smelled and sometimes attracted insects, yet they created a dead air space that held warmth. You imagine the muted thump of cold hitting those layers and stopping frustrated. Inside again, you begin to work. You press mud into cracks using bare fingers that quickly grow numb. The earth is cold and gritty. Each gap sealed feels like progress you can measure. Not dramatic, just effective. You learn that warmth is cumulative. Tiny improvements add up. A sealed seam here, a thicker wall there. You notice how sound changes as gaps close. The wind dulls, outside feels farther away. The shelter begins to hold not just heat, but silence. That quiet becomes its own comfort. It signals safety. Early settlers often prioritized roofs over everything else. A leaking roof did more than let water in. It pulled heat out. Snow melting and refreezing could rob a space of warmth overnight. Wooden shingles, bark, even thatch layered thickly were used to keep cold air from sinking straight down. Gravity, it turns out, works against warmth. As you work, your body warms from movement. Muscles generate heat better than any small flame at this stage. This is another hard-learned truth. Stillness is dangerous. You keep moving, stretching fingers, shifting weight, staying alive through motion. There is a rhythm to it. Press, smooth, step back, breathe. You think briefly of fire again. The temptation is strong. A flame feels like control. But settlers learned that lighting a fire too early wasted precious fuel in drafty spaces. better to make the room worthy of the fire first. Scholars still debate how often early settlers ran out of firewood before winter ended, but surviving records suggest it happened more than anyone likes to admit. The shelter slowly changes character. It feels less like a temporary stop and more like a container, a place that might hold you through a season. You test the door or hanging cloth that serves as one. Heavy fabric or wood slabs reduce air exchange. Each time it closes, the room feels steadier. A strange calm settles over you as the work continues. There is satisfaction in this kind of labour. No abstraction. Every action has a clear purpose. Your senses sharpen. You notice how even your breath lingers longer, now less quickly stolen away. In some regions, settlers partially buried their homes into hillsides. Earth holds temperature better than air. You picture those structures half hidden, trading visibility for warmth, a reminder that survival often required swallowing pride. Looking impressive meant nothing if you froze. As midday approaches, the sun lifts just enough to tease warmth onto the roof. It does not last long, but it helps dry the mud you pressed into place. You sit back and listen. The wind still blows, but it sounds distant now, like weather happening to someone else. You realize something quietly profound. Shelter is not passive, it is active defense. Fire will come later, but this space must first learn how to keep what little heat you can give it. That understanding reshapes how you think about warmth entirely. As evening edges closer again, you feel better prepared. Not warm exactly, but less exposed, less at the mercy of the night. The shelter stands quietly around you, doing its job. Tomorrow, you will invite fire inside. But tonight, you rest knowing the walls will not betray you as easily. You step outside again, later than planned, because the shelter held you longer than expected. That alone feels like progress. The cold still meets you immediately, but it no longer feels personal. It feels like a condition, something to work with, instead of something that attacks you. Today your attention turns downward toward the ground beneath your feet. The earth looks inert, lifeless, but settlers learned quickly that soil is a quiet ally. You press your boot into it and feel how little it changes temperature compared to the air. Even now, with frost whitening the surface, the ground holds yesterday's warmth deep below. This realization altered how people built. It changed where they slept. It even changed how they thought about safety. A mainstream historical fact is that many early settlers across Europe, North America and parts of Asia lived in partially sunken homes during colder seasons. These structures, sometimes called pit houses or earth lodges, reduced exposure to wind and stabilized interior temperatures. The earth does not warm quickly, but it also does not cool quickly. That steadiness is priceless. You begin digging not deeply at first, just enough to feel the difference. The soil smells damp and mineral rich. Your hands sting as you scoop, but the deeper you go, the less biting the cold feels. This is not imagination. Historians still argue whether early settlers intentionally understood thermal mass in scientific terms, or whether they simply noticed what worked and repeated it. Standing here, you do not care what they called it. You care that it helps. As the pit grows, the wind loses interest in you. It skims the surface above, passing over your head. Down here, the air feels heavier, calmer. Sound softens. Even your breath seems less hurried. You begin to understand why some settlers slept below ground level, even inside above-ground homes, creating sunken sleeping areas where warmth pooled. A quirky but well-documented detail comes from winter camps, where settlers lined dugout floors with pine boughs, straw, or even dried seaweed in coastal regions. These materials trapped air, reducing heat loss to the soil while still benefiting from its stability. The smell could be sharp or briny, but comfort outweighed aesthetics. You pause to stretch your fingers. Digging warms you faster than fire ever could. Your shoulders loosen, blood moves. Movement is warmth's oldest companion. You keep going, carving out a shallow depression inside the shelter, imagining how your body will fit there at night. Lower than the rest of the room, protected. Some scholars debate whether these earth-based adaptations were inspired more by indigenous architecture than independent experimentation. Historians still argue whether early settlers openly acknowledged this borrowing or quietly absorbed it without record. What matters now is that the method works. The ground does not judge who learns from it. As the sun reaches its weak peak, you notice how light behaves differently inside the pit. Shadows soften. The earth reflects less glare. The space feels enclosed without being cramped. It feels intentional. A place designed for the body, not for standing tall or showing status. You line the depression carefully, smoothing edges, packing soil, firm. Gaps invite cold. Density invites warmth. You learn this lesson again and again. The ground teaches it patiently. You test the space by sitting, then lying back. The cold is still there, but muted, less aggressive. It presses evenly instead of stabbing. Early accounts mention settlers using heated stones placed into pits before bedtime. The stones released warmth slowly through the night. This practice carried risk. Cracked stones could explode, fumes from certain rocks were dangerous. Yet people experimented anyway. Survival demanded creativity. Historians still debate how widespread this practice truly was, but the idea appears across multiple regions and cultures. You imagine the sounds of stones settling into soil, a soft hiss as heat meets earth. Not dramatic, just effective. The kind of warmth that lingers. As afternoon fades, you climb out of the pit and look at your shelter differently. It no longer feels flat. It has depth, layers, a relationship with the land rather than a fight against it. You realize that settlers who ignored the ground suffered more. They built upward when they should have built inward. The wind picks up again, but you feel strangely detached from it now. You know where you will sleep. You know the earth will share what it can. That knowledge settles your mind. Anxiety gives way to planning. Small steps, measured decisions. You gather bedding materials next. Straw-dried grasses, whatever you can find. Each armful smells of sun and decay, life folded into usefulness. You spread it thickly in the pit, creating a buffer between your body and the soil. Air pockets form. Insulation grows. As night approaches once more, the temperature drops, but you are not starting from nothing this time. The shelter holds. The ground supports. You feel the quiet confidence that comes from adaptation rather than force. Tomorrow, fire will finally join this equation. But tonight, you trust the earth to do what it has always done. Hold steady, release slowly, keep you alive while the world above freezes and thaws without you. Morning comes quietly, as if it does not want to disturb the fragile balance you have built. You wake with a stiffness that reminds you sleep here is still a negotiation. Yet there is something new underneath the discomfort. Warmth has lingered, not generously, not luxuriously, but faithfully. You notice it first in your hands. They move a little easier. The earth beneath you has done its part. Today, your attention shifts outward again, toward the trees standing just beyond the shelter. They look motionless, indifferent, but you already know better. Not all wood is equal. Some burns fast and leaves you colder than before. Some smoulders uselessly. Some becomes a steady companion through the night. Learning the difference will matter more than almost anything else you do. You step outside and breathe in deeply. The forest smells sharp and clean resin and cold mingling together. Early settlers quickly learned that firewood selection was not guesswork. It was knowledge passed along, argued over, and sometimes learned the hard way. Hardwood burns longer and hotter than softwood. This is now basic understanding, but it was once survival intelligence. Oak, maple, hickory, beech. These names meant warmth. They burned dense and slow-producing coals that lasted through long hours. Pine and fir, by contrast, flared brightly and disappeared quickly, leaving little behind. Settlers often used softwoods to start fires and hardwoods to sustain them. That distinction saved fuel and energy in winter months when both were scarce. You walk among the trees, touching bark, noting weight, scent, resistance. Fresh-cut wood feels heavier in the hands, damp with sap. Seasoned wood sounds hollow when struck together. Early accounts describe settlers listening to firewood before choosing it, trusting sound as much as sight. A dull thud meant moisture. A clear crack meant readiness. There is an old saying repeated in frontier journals that wood warms you twice, once when you cut it and once when you burn it. Some versions say 3 times, counting the splitting. It sounds folksy, almost cheerful, but standing here sweating lightly, even in cold air, you understand the truth beneath it. Labour creates heat, planning extends it. There remains debate among historians about how consistently early settlers seasoned their firewood. Some records suggest careful planning years ahead, while others describe desperate burning of green logs due to shortages. The reality likely varied wildly, depending on location, climate, and experience. You suspect it also depended on optimism. People always believe they will have time later. As you chop, the rhythm settles you. Lift, strike, split, each motion deliberate. The sound echoes through the trees, sharp and satisfying. Your breath clouds and clears, muscles warm. You pause occasionally to rest, listening to the forest, respond with silence. Even the birds seem to conserve energy. A lesser-known detail appears in winter letters describing settlers mixing different woods in a single fire to control burn rate. A base of hardwood coals, topped with softer wood, created both immediate heat and lasting warmth. It was fire management, not fire indulgence. Flames were shaped, not celebrated. You carry the split logs back toward the shelter arms, straining pleasantly. Firewood becomes heavier, the longer you hold it, reminding you not to overreach. Better multiple trips than one exhausted stumble. Injuries in winter were especially dangerous. Healing slowed. Cold stiffened joints and dulled sensation. Many small accidents turned fatal simply because bodies could not recover. Inside, you stack the wood carefully, off the ground, away from damp walls. Even here, discipline matters. Wet wood wastes effort. You test a log by knocking it against another. The sound rings clear. Good. You set aside kindling thin slivers, shaved carefully. These will coax flame into existence later. Some scholars question how often settlers truly succeeded in keeping fires going overnight. Accounts vary. Many describe banking fires under ash to preserve embers until morning. Others admit fires went out frequently, forcing cold starts before dawn. You imagine the frustration of fumbling with numb fingers, breath shallow, praying a spark will catch. You prepare the hearth area slowly, stones arranged to contain flame. Space cleared, airflow considered. Fire demands oxygen, but punishes drafts. Early hearths were often inefficient by modern standards, yet people learned to adjust them instinctively. They watched smoke behavior, flame color, ember formation. Fire became another living presence in the room. Before lighting anything, you pause. There is a moment of respect here. Fire is comfort, yes, but also risk. Settler homes burned easily. Sparks jumped, chimneys clogged. A single mistake could erase months of labor in minutes. Many winter nights ended, not in cold, but in sudden loss. That fear lived alongside the warmth. You strike the spark carefully. A thin curl of smoke rises first hesitant. Then flame appears small and blue-edged. You feed it gently. Kindling catches, softwood flares. The sound is delicate, almost musical, a faint crackle. Heat brushes your face, tentative but real. As the fire grows, you add hardwood slowly. Flames deepen in color. Orange steadies. Coals begin to form. The shelter responds immediately. Air shifts. The space tightens, holding warmth. You feel it against your cheeks, your knees, the soles of your feet. Relief does not rush in. It arrives quietly and stays. You sit back watching. Fire demands patience. Too much wood too fast smothers it. Too little lets it die. Balance becomes instinctual over time. Early settlers often described fire tending as a form of meditation, though they would not have used that word. It required presence, attention, respect. As evening deepens, you bank the fire, carefully covering coals with ash to slow their burn. You are not trying to conquer the night, you're trying to survive it gently. The flames retreat, leaving a warm glow. You lie down in your earthen hollow firelight flickering across the walls. The smell of wood smoke settles into everything. It will linger for days, weeks, seasons. Settlers carried that scent with them always. It became part of identity. Outside, the cold presses close again, but it no longer feels like an enemy. It feels like a force you understand, just enough to live alongside. Wood chosen wisely, fire treated carefully, earth holding steady beneath you. You close your eyes, knowing that tomorrow will bring new lessons. For now, warmth breathes quietly in the room, and you let it carry you towards sleep. The fire does not roar. It never really does in places like this. Instead, it settles into a steady presence, a low companion that breathes and shifts as the hours pass. You learn quickly that fire is not a one-time achievement. It is a daily relationship. Ignore it and it sulks. Rush it and it turns dangerous. Respect it and it gives you just enough. You wake again before full light eyes opening to a faint orange glow under ash. The embers survived the night. That alone feels like a small victory. Early settlers wrote about this moment. Often, the quiet relief of finding life still glowing where cold tried to erase it. Rekindling from embers saved time, effort, and precious strength when mornings were cruel. You kneel, close, hands extended carefully. Heat licks your palms without biting. You feed the coals gently. Thin shavings first, then slightly thicker pieces. Flame returns in stages like memory waking up. There is a smell to it, dry and familiar, something between forest and home. That scent becomes reassurance. It surprises many people to learn that fires in early homes were rarely allowed to blaze freely. A widely accepted historical understanding is that settlers kept fires deliberately small for much of the day. Large flames wasted fuel and overheated rooms unevenly. Controlled heat mattered more than spectacle. Fire was managed, not admired. As the fire strengthens, you feel warmth spread unevenly. Knees glow, face warms, back remains cool. This imbalance teaches you something important. Heat must be directed. You reposition stones around the hearth, angling them to reflect warmth inward. Early hearth designs evolved slowly, guided by experience rather than theory. People noticed what worked and adjusted accordingly. You sit and watch smoke behavior. It curls, hesitates, then finds its way out through the opening above. Smoke inside was tolerated to a degree modern lungs would protest. Settlers accepted irritation, coughing, and watery eyes as part of warmth. Some even believed light smoke deterred insects and disease. Whether that belief had merit remains a subject of discussion among modern researchers, but the habit persisted. A curious detail from winter journals describes families timing their largest fires, not for nighttime, but for morning and evening. Midday warmth from the sun, however weak, could be supplemented with activity rather than fuel. Firewood was rationed with discipline that feels foreign now. Every log had a future purpose already assigned. You begin to understand how the fire shapes your day. Tasks cluster around it. Cooking, drying clothing, warming tools before use. Even conversation, when it happens, gravitates toward the hearth. Fire becomes the room's heart, not because it is dramatic, but because it is necessary. There remains disagreement among historians about how often fires were truly extinguished in early settlements. Some records suggest near constant maintenance with embers preserved for weeks. Others describe frequent relighting due to accidents, damp wood, or exhaustion. Both realities likely existed side by side, shaped by resources and experience. You prepare food slowly, letting the fire do double duty. A pot simmers, releasing steam that briefly warms the air before condensing on cold surfaces. Moisture inside the shelter increases slightly, softening dryness in your throat. Yet too much humidity invites cold later. Balance again. Everything is balance. As the day wears on, you notice how fire changes sound. The shelter creaks differently when warmed. Wood expands, easing tight joints. Even the wind sounds duller, as if muffled by heat. These subtle shifts become signals you learn to read. Too much popping might mean moisture escaping wood too quickly. Too much silence might mean the fire is starving. A lesser-known practice involved placing flat stones near the hearth throughout the day allowing them to absorb heat. These stones were then moved closer to sleeping areas at night. This passive transfer extended warmth without additional fuel. It required planning and patience, qualities settlers developed out of necessity rather than virtue. You test a stone carefully with your hand. Warm, not hot, perfect. You set it aside, already thinking of night. Fire forces you to think ahead constantly. There is no indulgence in the present moment without consequence later. As evening approaches, you clean the hearth. Ashes are not waste, they are insulation. You spread them carefully over coals, once more preserving heat while limiting oxygen. This practice appears repeatedly in historical accounts, described in different words, but always with the same intention. Keep warmth alive quietly. The fire dims and the room settles. Shadows soften. The flicker becomes a glow. You feel your body relax in response. Muscles loosen. Breath deepens. Warmth does not excite you here. It calms you. It tells your nervous system that survival is possible for another night. Some scholars suggest that constant attention to fire shaped early settlers' sense of time. Days were not divided by clocks, but by heat cycles. Rekindle, feed, bank, rest. The rhythm repeated until it became instinct. Firekeeping became a form of caretaking, not just of flame, but of family and self. You lie down again in the earthen hollow stone placed nearby, fire banked just enough. The warmth is subtle now, but steady. It wraps around you slowly, rather than striking all at once. You listen to the quiet crackle under ash, a soft reassurance that life continues even in near stillness. Outside, cold presses closer as night deepens. Inside, you have learned not to fight it head-on. You negotiate, you plan, you adapt. Fire is no longer just a tool, it is a daily ritual, a shared understanding between you and the elements. As sleep approaches, the glow fades further, but you are not afraid of the dark. You trust the embers, you trust your choices. Tomorrow the fire will ask for your attention again, and you will answer. For now, warmth hums softly, and you drift with it. The smoke finds you before you fully wake. Not thick, not alarming, just enough to remind your throat that warmth here comes with compromise. Your eyes sting lightly. You blink slow and patient because panic wastes air. The fire has shifted overnight, embers settling into a pattern that sends a lazy ribbon of smoke curling inward before it remembers its path upward. You sit up and breathe carefully through your nose. Smoke indoors is not a mistake. It is an accepted cost. People in the past understood something uncomfortable, but practical. Perfect ventilation meant losing heat. Poor ventilation kept warmth, but irritated lungs. Most chose the middle ground. Enough airflow to survive, not enough to feel pleasant. It is widely recognized that early homes lacked chimneys, as we know them today. Smoke escaped through holes in roofs, loose thatch or high wall gaps. This design trapped heat low while allowing fumes to drift upward and out slowly. Modern sensibilities recoil at the idea, but for settlers the trade made sense. You adjust the hearth, slightly nudging a stone opening a narrow channel above. The smoke responds immediately, lifting, thinning, behaving. Fire teaches cause and effect better than any lecture ever could. You learn by watching, by coughing once and correcting. There are accounts describing how some settlers deliberately tolerated a haze of smoke to deter insects and rodents. Fleas, lice, and other pests disliked it. Whether this was fully effective remains debated, but the belief shaped behaviour. Smoke was not always seen as an enemy. Sometimes it was a shield. Your clothes smell of it now. Wood smoke sinks into fibres and refuses to leave. Settlers often carried that scent with them constantly. It marked them as people of fire and labour. There are descriptions of newcomers smelling like clean linen and oil, only to lose that distinction after a single winter. Smoke levelled everyone. You open the door, covering briefly, just enough to refresh the air. Cold rushes in, eagerly, sharp and intrusive. You close it again quickly. The contrast is startling. Too much fresh air steals warmth instantly. The lesson is immediate. You trade a little comfort for survival again. Some researchers still question how chronic smoke exposure affected long-term health among early settlers. Records suggest respiratory issues were common yet difficult to separate from other factors like cold dampness and malnutrition. People lived shorter lives on average, but warmth kept them alive long enough to matter. You stir the fire gently, encouraging cleaner combustion. Dry wood burns with less smoke. This reinforces yesterday's lesson. Preparation upstream solves problems downstream. The better the wood, the calmer the fire, the easier the breathing. There is a faint crackling sound as sap pockets release. The fire smells sweeter now, less acrid. You relax your shoulders slightly. Your eyes stop watering. Balance achieved for the moment. A small but telling habit appears in diaries describing settlers wiping soot from faces each morning as part of routine. Not vanity, but hygiene. Soot clogged pores and irritated skin. Warm water was rare, but damp cloths did the job. Cleanliness here was practical, not decorative. You move about the shelter, warming tools near the hearth. Cold metal bites skin and steals heat fast. A knife warmed first behaves better. A needle passes through fabric more easily. These small adjustments add up. Comfort is cumulative. You hear a neighbour coughing somewhere nearby. The sound carries through cold air easily. It reminds you that everyone is making similar compromises. No one is breathing mountain fresh air indoors. They are breathing survivable air. There is disagreement among scholars about whether smoke-filled homes affected sleep quality. Some argue mild smoke acted as a sedative, dulling senses and encouraging rest. Others suggest it disrupted breathing and increased fatigue. Both may be true. Here, sleep comes not because conditions are ideal, but because exhaustion demands it. You hang damp clothing near the fire, careful not to scorch it. Steam rises briefly, thickening the air. You open the roof gap slightly wider until it clears. Fire management becomes second nature. Adjust, observe, adjust again. As the day progresses, the smoke thins. The room feels lived in, warm but imperfect. You notice how your body adapts. Your throat grows less sensitive. Your eyes tolerate more. Humans adjust quickly when survival depends on it. There is a curious reference in a winter letter describing settlers rubbing fat or oil into nostrils to reduce irritation from smoke. It sounds unpleasant and probably was, but it offered relief. Comfort was improvised constantly, often in ways that sound strange now. You step outside briefly to clear your head. The air feels shockingly clean and cold. Your lungs expand greedily. You stay only a moment. Too long and you lose the warmth you worked for. When you return inside, the smoky air feels almost protective by comparison. As evening approaches again, you prepare the fire carefully. Clean burns reduce smoke overnight. You scrape excess ash, reposition, wood check airflow. Night is not the time for experimentation. Predictability keeps you alive. You bank the fire once more. Smoke settles low, then fades as embers glow quietly. The shelter grows still. The smell of smoke lingers softly, not unpleasant now. Familiar, reassuring even. You lie down and breathe slowly. Your chest rises and falls in rhythm with the faint crackle beneath ash. Smoke taught you patience today. It taught you that warmth is rarely free. It always costs something. Air, comfort, ease. Outside, the cold waits clean and sharp. Inside, the air is thick with the signs of life. You choose it without hesitation. Sleep comes slowly, carried on the soft scent of wood and the knowledge that you learned how to breathe through another winter day. When you dress in the morning, you do it slowly, deliberately, like assembling a shelter around your own body. Clothing here is not decoration. It is strategy. Every layer answers a question the cold keeps asking. How much heat can you hold? How much wind can you block? How long can you endure? You start with linen, close to the skin. It feels cool at first, almost damp, but it absorbs sweat and keeps it from chilling you later. That detail mattered more than anyone expected. People learned quickly that moisture was a quiet enemy. Sweat that stayed trapped against skin stole heat faster than bare air ever could. Over the linen goes wool, thick, scratchy, stubborn wool. It smells faintly of animal and smoke and last season's labour. Wool has a strange generosity to it. Even when damp, it continues to insulate. This quality made it invaluable long before anyone understood why. Settlers did not need microscopes. They needed nights that did not end in shaking. It is well established that wool production became a cornerstone of cold climate survival. Sheep thrived where crops struggled, and their fleece became wearable warmth. Entire settlement economies quietly depended on it. When wool was scarce, winters felt longer and harsher. You add another layer, then another. A vest, a coat, each one traps a pocket of air. Air does not feel like much, but still air holds heat beautifully. You realize that what you are really wearing is atmosphere, a small controlled climate you carry with you. There is debate among historians about how many layers people typically wore indoors. Some accounts describe settlers remaining fully dressed even while sleeping. Others suggest clothing was adjusted constantly throughout the day. The truth likely shifted with activity. Movement generated heat, stillness demanded insulation. You tie cuffs tightly at wrists and ankles. Openings invite cold, buttons ties pins. Every closure matters. You think briefly of how many tiny fastening innovations emerged simply because warmth leaked away through gaps. Fashion followed necessity, not the other way around. A lesser-known practice involved wearing multiple hats. Heat escapes quickly through the head. Settlers often layered caps, hoods and scarves, especially at night. You pull one on now and feel immediate relief. Your thoughts slow slightly, as if warmth reaches the mind itself. You notice how clothing changes sound. Fabric softens movement. Wool muffles footsteps. Layers create a hush around you. Even your breathing feels quieter. This subtle effect made nights calmer, reducing noise that might otherwise disturb sleep. Some early journals mention garments stuffed with additional fibers, grass or even feathers sewn between layers. These improvised quilts moved with the body. They were heavy and awkward but effective. Comfort was not elegance, it was insulation. You move around the shelter and feel how different tasks require different clothing strategies. Chopping wood demands flexibility. Sitting demands thickness. Settlers learn to shed and add layers constantly. Too much insulation during labour caused sweat. Too little during rest caused shivering. The body became a system to manage carefully. There is ongoing discussion among researchers about how much clothing limited mobility and increased fatigue. Heavy garments restricted movement, yet exposure risked worse consequences. People adapted by pacing themselves differently. Work slowed in winter, not because of laziness, but because energy had to be conserved. You adjust your footwear next. Leather stiffens in cold. You soften it near the fire before putting boots on. Inside, you add thick socks, sometimes doubled. Straw or dried grass is packed between layers in desperate times. It crackles faintly when you walk, but it keeps toes alive. A curious reference from a winter settlement describes people sleeping with boots on to avoid the pain of frozen leather in the morning. It sounds uncomfortable, and it was, but frozen boots could become unwearable. You flex your feet now and understand the logic. As the day goes on, you notice how your clothing holds smoke. The scent clings. It becomes part of the fabric. That smell tells a story. It marks experience. New clothes smell different. Lived-in clothes smell warm. There is disagreement among scholars about how often early settlers washed winter clothing. Water was cold. Drying took time and fuel. Most washing waited for warmer seasons. Layers were aired rather than cleaned. Smoke helped reduce odour and pests, another quiet benefit of fire. You sit near the hearth, letting warmth penetrate fabric slowly. Wool absorbs heat and releases it gradually. You feel comfort spread inward rather than flash on the surface. This slow warmth soothes muscles tired from cold tension. As evening approaches, you prepare your sleeping clothes. You choose layers, not for movement, but for stillness. Extra thickness at the core, head covered, hands tucked in. You think about how many people underestimated nighttime cold and paid for it dearly. Warm days tricked them, nights corrected them. Some settlers used heated stones, wrapped in cloth and placed near the body. Others slept in shared beds to combine warmth. Clothing was only one part of the equation. Heat was communal, shared, transferred wherever possible. You lie down and feel the weight of garments settle around you. The pressure is comforting. It reminds you of boundaries. Inside this layered cocoon, your body holds what little warmth it can generate. Outside, cold presses but does not immediately win. You listen to the fire breathe under ash. You listen to fabric shift as you move slightly. Every sound feels softened, distant. Clothing has become architecture again, just as it was meant to be. Tomorrow, you will learn how others shared warmth together. For now, you rest wrapped in fibers that once belonged to plants and animals transformed into time bought from the cold. You sleep knowing that what you wear tonight is as important as any wall you built. By now, you have stopped pretending that everything you know came from your own figuring out. The land has been teaching you, yes, but so have the people who knew it long before you arrived. Some lessons are obvious only in hindsight. Others were borrowed quietly, absorbed without ceremony, because survival does not wait for pride to catch up. You notice it first in the way paths are cleared. Not straight lines cut aggressively through the forest, but gentle curves that follow natural shelter. Wind behaves differently here. It breaks, it loses confidence. Someone showed this to someone else who showed it again until it became habit rather than instruction. It is broadly acknowledged today that many early settlers relied heavily on indigenous knowledge to endure harsh winters, even when they did not record or credit it openly. From shelter placement to insulation techniques, the wisdom was local specific and tested over generations. The cold does not care who discovered what first. It only rewards what works. You adjust your shelter again, adding an outer windbreak made from branches and packed debris. This idea did not come from experimentation. It came from watching, from noticing which structures nearby stayed warmer longer. Indigenous dwellings often emphasized layered defenses against wind rather than brute thickness. You see the logic now. Wind is the thief. Stop it and warmth stays home. Inside, you recall how bedding materials were arranged yesterday. Thick layers underneath, lighter layers above. This mirrors techniques used in longhouses and winter lodges, where sleeping platforms were raised slightly to avoid cold pooling at ground level. Heat rises, but cold settles. That simple truth shaped centuries of design. There is still active discussion among historians about how willingly settlers accepted this guidance. Some accounts describe cooperation and learning. Others hint at reluctance and delayed adoption. What remains clear is that the methods persisted because they saved lives. Necessity has a way of dissolving resistance. You think about fire placement again, not centered in the room but offset. This allows heat to circulate without pulling smoke directly downward. Many indigenous structures used this approach, balancing warmth and airflow elegantly. You reposition stones, slightly adjusting the hearth. The room responds with quieter smoke and steadier warmth. A small but striking detail appears in oral traditions, describing people sleeping with their heads oriented away from prevailing winds, even indoors. This minimized heat loss through breathing. You test this tonight and feel the difference immediately. Cold air no longer brushes your face as sharply. Sleep comes easier. You step outside briefly and study the surrounding area with new eyes. Trees are not obstacles, they are shields. Snowdrifts form where wind is blocked, revealing invisible currents. You learn to read these patterns. They guide where you stack supplies, where you stand, where you rest. There remains disagreement among researchers about how much of this knowledge transfer was conscious versus observational. Did settlers ask questions or simply copy what they saw? Probably both. Learning does not always come with acknowledgement. Sometimes it comes with quiet imitation. You remember a curious account describing settlers insulating walls with dried grasses mixed with clay, a method identical to techniques used locally for generations. The materials were familiar. The method was not originally theirs. Yet it worked. That was enough. As the day progresses, you adjust your routines. Tasks are done when the sun is highest, just as local practices dictated. Night work is minimized, energy is preserved, the cold punishes wasted effort, efficiency becomes respect. You notice how the shelter feels different now, not just warmer but calmer. Drafts are fewer, the fire behaves better, the earth beneath you feels more cooperative. These changes did not come from innovation, they came from listening. Some scholars continue to debate how much early survival owed to shared knowledge versus individual adaptation. The truth likely lies in overlap. Knowledge spreads through contact observation and necessity. Credit is less important than continuity. You prepare your sleeping area with renewed care. Materials are layered intentionally, openings minimized, stones placed strategically. This feels less like trial and error now, and more like participation in something older. A conversation across time. You think about how many winters these methods have seen, how many bodies they have warmed, how many nights they have carried people through when hope felt thin. Techniques refined not by theory, but by repetition. As darkness settles, the fire glows steadily, smoke behaves, warmth holds. You lie down and feel held by the space, rather than merely occupying it. The shelter no longer feels temporary, it feels informed. You breathe slowly, aware that survival here has never been a solo achievement. It has always been shared, passed along quietly, carried forward by those willing to learn. The cold outside does not know your history, but inside, warmth remembers. Sleep comes gently, guided by methods older than memory, proven again simply because you are still here. Night teaches you things daylight never bothers to explain. When the sun drops and the fire quiets, you become aware of how much warmth lives in bodies rather than buildings. The shelter helps, yes, but it is people and animals that carry heat through the longest hours. Tonight you rearrange where you sleep not for comfort, but for survival. You pull bedding closer to the hearth side of the room, not close enough to risk sparks, just near enough to feel the soft gradient of warmth. Then you hesitate, considering another option that once felt unthinkable. You move closer to others. Across many early settlements, it became normal to sleep communally during winter. This is not folklore. Household records and personal letters repeatedly describe multiple family members sharing a single bed or sleeping platform during cold months. Separate rooms were a luxury few could afford, and warmth mattered more than privacy. You lie down, shoulder to shoulder, or perhaps back to back, feeling the immediate difference. Heat gathers between bodies trapped and amplified. Breath warms the shared air. Muscles relax slightly, no longer fighting the cold alone. The sensation is grounding, almost ancient. There is still lively discussion among historians about how much communal sleeping was driven by necessity versus cultural norms imported from Europe. Some argue it was already common practice, simply intensified by frontier conditions. Others suggest the environment forced people into closer proximity than they preferred. Either way, winter erased many boundaries. You adjust blankets, carefully tucking edges tightly to prevent heat from escaping. Drafts are less noticeable now. The space between bodies becomes a pocket of stability. Even your thoughts slow. Anxiety loses momentum when warmth holds steady. A small but memorable detail from early diaries mentions people synchronizing sleep positions deliberately. Turning at the same time reduced cold air intrusion. It sounds oddly coordinated, almost choreographed, but it worked. Survival encouraged cooperation at the most intimate level. You also notice animals nearby. A dog curls close to the bed. Livestock shift in their stalls, just beyond the wall. In some regions, animals were brought indoors during extreme cold. This was not sentimentality, it was physics. Large bodies radiate heat continuously. You feel it now, subtle but persistent. It is worth noting that many early homes were designed with this in mind. Sleeping areas were placed near shared walls with animal enclosures or storage spaces filled with organic material. These acted as thermal buffers. The house itself became a system, redistributing warmth where it was needed most. There are scholars who continue to question how hygienic these arrangements truly were. Illness, parasites, and odours were real concerns. Yet winter forced difficult choices. People weighed immediate warmth against long-term discomfort. Cold kills quickly, other risks felt manageable by comparison. You listen to the sounds of shared sleep, breathing overlaps, a quiet cough, a shift of weight. These noises are oddly soothing. They confirm you are not alone in the dark. Loneliness magnifies cold. Company dulls it. You remember reading that in some settlements, communal sleeping arrangements were rotated. Those most vulnerable children and elders were placed in the warmest positions. Stronger adults took outer edges where cold crept in. Warmth was rationed deliberately, like food or fuel. You test this arrangement tonight. You place yourself where drafts are most likely, trusting layers and movement to compensate. It feels purposeful. Responsibility replaces discomfort. You focus less on your own chill and more on maintaining the shared heat. There is an old winter saying, recorded in several regions, that a house breathes through its people at night. When everyone sleeps together, the house stays alive. When they scatter, it grows cold and hollow. Standing here, lying here, you understand what that means. A curious anecdote from a northern settlement describes families hanging heavy curtains around beds to create enclosed sleeping tents within rooms. These fabric walls trapped body heat effectively. It was a room inside a room, designed purely for night survival. You imagine the muffled quiet inside, such a space breath, echoing softly. Some historians debate whether these enclosed sleeping spaces improved rest or made people feel claustrophobic. Accounts vary. Comfort is subjective. Warmth, however, is not. It either holds or it does not. You settle deeper into bedding, feeling the warmth build gradually. It does not arrive all at once. It accumulates minute by minute. The fire has long since banked low, but it no longer matters as much. Bodies are doing the work now. You notice how quickly sleep approaches when shivering stops. Muscles unclench, jaw loosens, breath deepens. The body, reassured by steady temperature, allows rest. This connection between warmth and sleep becomes undeniable. Outside, the cold intensifies. Wind scrapes against the shelter, searching for weakness. Inside, shared heat resists. Quietly, no drama, no noise, just persistence. There remains ongoing debate about how these sleeping practices influence social bonds. Did closeness breed cooperation, or was cooperation simply necessary? First, perhaps the two reinforced each other. Winter has a way of simplifying relationships. You depend on one another, or you do not make it through. As you drift towards sleep, you feel the gentle rise and fall of shared breathing. It reminds you that warmth is not always something you build or burn. Sometimes it is something you borrow and return. Tomorrow you will think about how bodies generate heat even while awake, and how movement becomes another tool against cold. For now, you let stillness do its quiet work, held between others, carried gently through another winter night. Morning arrives not with light, but with movement. You feel it before you see it. A shift beside you, a stretch, a quiet exhale that stirs the air. Bodies waking generate warmth and the shelter responds. Heat blooms briefly, then fades if you do not act. You have learned by now that warmth is temporary unless you keep it circulating. You rise slowly, not wanting to lose what you gained overnight. Cold waits just beyond stillness. The moment you stop moving, it begins to creep back in. Early settlers understood this instinctively. Winter days were structured around motion, not leisure. Activity was not productivity in the modern sense. It was temperature control. There is ample evidence in period records that people deliberately planned continuous, low-intensity work throughout winter days. Chopping, repairing, cooking, mending. Long stretches of sitting were avoided unless fire or shared heat was available. The body itself became a heating system that had to stay online. You begin with simple tasks, sweeping ash, rearranging bedding, carrying water carefully so it does not freeze in your hands. Each movement warms you slightly. Blood flows, fingers loosen, you feel capable again. You notice how quickly chill returns when you pause. Just a few seconds too long and stiffness creeps in. This is why early settlers rarely stood idle. Even conversation happened while hands worked. Stillness was a luxury reserved for summer. There remains debate among historians about whether constant movement contributed to chronic fatigue or built resilience. Diaries suggest both. People were tired, often deeply so, but they were also remarkably strong. Their endurance was shaped by necessity rather than choice. You step outside to gather more fuel, choosing tasks that require walking rather than standing. Walking keeps warmth evenly distributed. It prevents sweat from pooling. Settlers favoured this rhythm instinctively, fast enough to stay warm, slow enough to avoid exhaustion. As you move, you listen to your body. Cold fingers mean it is time to swing arms wider. Tight shoulders mean it is time to lift and carry. The body becomes a gauge, more reliable than any thermometer. A small but telling observation from winter letters describes people deliberately pacing indoors during storms, circling rooms simply to maintain warmth. It sounds restless, but it was practical. Movement was medicine. You return inside and begin cooking, stirring steadily. Heat from the fire combines with muscle activity. Warmth layers itself in stages. The smell of food rises, comforting and grounding. Cooking was favoured winter work because it generated heat in multiple ways at once. Some scholars continue to examine whether this constant activity affected mental health. Did motion distract from fear and isolation, or did it leave little room for rest? Accounts suggest movement offered a sense of control. Doing something felt better than waiting. You notice how tasks are chosen strategically now. Heavy labour happens in the coldest hours. Fine work waits for warmer moments near the fire. This pacing preserves dexterity and prevents injury. Frozen fingers drop tools. Warm fingers work cleanly. You stretch, deliberately maintaining flexibility. Cold tightens muscles and invites strain. Settlers learned to counter this by staying limber, even without formal knowledge of anatomy. Experience taught them what pain followed neglect. There is discussion among researchers about how winter labour patterns differed between regions. In harsher climates, work slowed dramatically. In milder cold, activity continued almost unchanged. Adaptation was always local, shaped by environment rather than tradition. You sit briefly near the hearth, just long enough to feel warmth sink in, then rise again. Too long sitting steals momentum. You have learned this lesson well now. Warmth must be circulated, not hoarded. As afternoon passes, fatigue settles in gently. Not the sharp exhaustion of crisis, but a steady drain. You manage it carefully. Small rests, warm drinks, controlled breathing. The goal is not comfort, but sustainability. You notice how your perception of cold has shifted. What once felt unbearable now feels manageable. Not pleasant, but predictable, familiar. This change is not physical alone. It is psychological. Understanding reduces fear. Some historical accounts suggest that winter routines created a different sense of time. Days blurred together, marked not by events, but by temperature cycles. Rekindle, work, eat, move, rest, repeat. Time became circular rather than linear. As evening approaches, you slow deliberately. Tasks taper off. Energy is conserved. You prepare for night not by collapsing, but by transitioning. Movement gives way to warmth retention. You reflect briefly on how essential this rhythm has become. Body heat, motion, planning, none of it is accidental. Survival is choreography now, a sequence learned here, step by step. When you finally settle near the fire again, warmth feels earned. Muscles hum quietly. Breath is steady. You have kept yourself warm today, not by fighting the cold, but by staying in motion with it. Tomorrow, you will learn how even sleep itself was adjusted to maintain this balance. For now, you let your body rest, knowing it will be called upon again soon. When night settles again, you realize that sleep itself has become another tool to manage warmth. It is no longer just rest, it is strategy. The way you lie down, what you lie on, and what surrounds you matters as much as what you did all day. You prepare the bed slowly, almost ceremonially. Straw comes first, Not fresh green straw that holds moisture, but dry, brittle stalks that snap softly in your hands. You spread it thick, fluffing it until air pockets form. Air is the secret ingredient here. Still air resists cold better than anything solid ever could. Over the straw go feathers if you have them. Goose feathers were prized not for luxury, but for survival. They trap warmth with remarkable efficiency. Even people who owned little else guarded feather bedding fiercely. In winter, a good feather mattress could mean the difference between rest and endless shivering. It is commonly accepted by historians that early settlers often slept on beds far thicker than modern ones, not softer, but deeper. Height mattered. Cold air pooled near the floor, elevation, even by a foot, reduced exposure. You notice this immediately when you test the bed. The air feels calmer up here, less biting. You tuck blankets, carefully sealing edges. Loose corners leak heat. You learned this lesson, watching smoke find gaps. Warmth behaves the same way. It escapes wherever it can. You press fabric tight, creating a contained pocket where your body heat can accumulate. There are differing interpretations among scholars about how often bedding was refreshed during winter. Some sources suggest straw was replaced regularly to avoid dampness and pests. Others imply that bedding was left undisturbed for long stretches to preserve warmth. The truth likely depended on resources and weather. Here you trust your senses. Dry stays, damp goes. You slide into the bed and feel the layers respond. Straw compresses slightly. Feathers shift and settle. The sensation is firm, but forgiving. The cold does not stab upward the way it did before. It presses evenly, politely, as if waiting to see whether it will be allowed in. A small but revealing detail from winter diaries describes people sleeping with their knees slightly drawn up to reduce surface area exposed to cold air. It is not a posture taught. It is one discovered by tired bodies seeking comfort. You find yourself doing it naturally. You adjust the blankets again, covering your head but leaving space to breathe. This balance matters. Too sealed and air grows stale. Too open and cold rushes in. You test, adjust, test again. Eventually you find the quiet middle ground where breath warms the space without suffocating it. There is still discussion among researchers about whether heavy bedding improved sleep quality or merely prevented freezing. Some accounts describe deep uninterrupted rest. Others mention restless nights, punctuated by waking and repositioning. Both likely happened. Warmth does not guarantee peace, but it makes peace possible. You listen to the sounds of the night from inside this layered cocoon. Wind scrapes along the shelter walls. Snow, or perhaps sleet, taps faintly above. Inside the bed absorbs sound, softening it. Even the fire's last embers are muffled now. Quiet settles in. Your body begins to relax more fully. Muscles that stayed tense all day finally let go. This release generates warmth too. Stress burns energy. Calm conserves it. Sleep here is not escape, it is conservation. You think briefly about how beds were shared again tonight. How heat from another body warms the bedding itself, turning it into a reservoir that holds warmth long after movement stops. Beds remembered heat. This was understood intuitively. Once warmed bedding was not disturbed unnecessarily. Some accounts mention people placing warm stones at the foot of the bed, wrapped carefully to avoid burns. Others used hot water in sealed containers when available. These practices varied widely. Risk was weighed against benefit. Burns healed poorly in winter. Caution ruled. You settle deeper and notice something subtle. The smell of straw and feathers mixes with wood smoke and fabric. It is not unpleasant. It is earthy animal alive. This scent becomes associated with safety. Later, long after winters like this end, people will remember it and feel warm, even when they are not. There is an ongoing debate among historians about whether bedding practices differed significantly between social classes in frontier settings. Evidence suggests that while materials varied, the principles remained the same. Insulation mattered more than status. Cold flattened hierarchy quickly. You breathe slowly now, each breath warming the space under the blankets a little more. The bed becomes its own climate, separate from the room. Outside that boundary, cold exists. Inside, it is held at bay. Your thoughts drift not into dreams yet, but into reflection. You realize how much intention goes into something as simple as lying down. Nothing here is accidental. Every layer, every fold, every position has been learned through nights that did not go well. As sleep finally approaches, the bed feels almost alive beneath you, responding to your weight and warmth. You feel supported, insulated, held. The cold is still present in the world, but it has been negotiated with successfully for another night. Tomorrow you will learn how even what you eat contributes to this quiet battle for warmth. For now, you let the bed do its work. You let your body rest inside the careful architecture of straw and feather and cloth. Sleep arrives slowly, gently carried on warmth. You built with patience rather than force. You wake with hunger first, not light. It sits low and steady, a quiet reminder that warmth does not come only from fire and motion. It also comes from fuel taken inside the body. Winter teaches this lesson patiently, sometimes harshly. If you eat poorly, you feel it hours later, as cold settles deeper than it should. You move toward the hearth and begin preparing food with intention. Meals now are not about variety or pleasure. They are about heat production. Dense foods, slow digestion, sustained energy. People long ago understood this connection, without charts or calorie counts. They felt it in their bones. It is widely recognized that winter diets among early settlers shifted dramatically toward fats and preserved foods. Salted meat, dried fish rendered animal fat, and thick stews dominated. Fat was not feared. It was prized. It burned slowly inside the body, releasing warmth over time, rather than spiking and fading. You stir a pot that has been simmering since early morning. Steam rises and fogs the air briefly. The smell is rich, heavy, comforting. Even before you eat, you feel warmer just standing near it. Cooking heat combines with anticipation, and your body responds. There remains disagreement among historians about how much settlers truly understood nutrition versus relying on tradition. Some argue knowledge was experiential rather than conceptual. Others suggest folk understanding of food and warmth was surprisingly sophisticated. Either way, winter menus evolved to favour survival over preference. You ladle out a portion and eat slowly. The food is thick, almost sticky. It sits heavy in your stomach, grounding you. Within minutes, warmth spreads outward from your core. Fingers tingle, toes relax. The body becomes its own furnace again. A curious detail appears in several winter accounts, describing people drinking small amounts of hot liquid throughout the day rather than large amounts at once. This maintains steady warmth without overhydration, which could lead to chilling. Even water was managed carefully in cold months. You think about how different this feels from modern eating. There is no snacking here, no idle consumption. Food is planned. It has purpose. Each bite is weighed against tomorrow's needs. You leave a little in the pot deliberately. Hunger later will remind you to eat again and keep heat flowing. Some researchers continue to explore how seasonal eating patterns affected long-term health. Winters were harsh, but summers allowed recovery. Bodies adapted to cycles of scarcity and abundance. Modern bodies rarely experience this rhythm, for better or worse. You notice how eating changes your posture. Shoulders drop, jaw loosens, breath deepens. Warmth generated internally feels different from warmth supplied by fire. It is more stable, less dependent on circumstance. Settlers valued this deeply. A full stomach meant resilience. You prepare food not just for now, but for later. Fat skimmed from broth is saved. Scraps are dried, nothing is wasted. Each preserved bit is future warmth waiting patiently. This mindset becomes automatic. Waste feels dangerous. There is debate among scholars about how evenly food was distributed during winter within households. Some evidence suggests adults reduced intake to protect children and elders. Others indicate more equal sharing. Practices varied widely, shaped by culture and necessity. You step outside briefly after eating and feel the difference immediately. cold still bites, but it does not penetrate as deeply. Your body pushes back. Muscles generate heat more readily. Movement feels easier. Food has armed you. A small anecdote from a winter letter describes settlers craving fat so intensely that they drank melted tallow when supplies ran low. It sounds extreme, and it was, but it underscores the connection between fat and warmth. The body demanded what it needed. As the day goes on, you schedule meals strategically. A larger portion before rest, smaller portions before activity. This pacing keeps energy steady and prevents sudden chills. Winter living becomes a continuous balancing act between intake and output. You sit by the hearth, again sipping something warm. Heat spreads gently. The fire crackles softly. Outside, the world remains cold and indifferent. Inside, you have learned another way to hold it at bay. Food has become insulation you carry within you. It works quietly, without smoke or flame. It lasts through the night when fires fade. This understanding settles into you, becoming instinct rather than thought. As evening approaches, you prepare the final meal of the day with care. Night will test you again, but you will meet it fed warmed from the inside out, ready to rest. Tomorrow you will notice how even animals were drawn into the shared economy of warmth. For now you finish eating and feel heat settle comfortably in your core, steady and reliable. By the time evening leans in again, you start to notice how animals are never far from warmth or from you. They follow heat instinctively, the same way you do now. You hear it in the shuffle of hooves, the low rustle of bedding, the quiet breaths that fill spaces humans alone could never warm. You step outside and check the small enclosure nearby. The animals are restless but calm, their bodies steaming faintly in the cold air. Large living sources of heat. Early settlers did not sentimentalize this. They observed it. They adapted to it. Livestock were not just food or labor. They were thermal assets. Many early homesteads were designed so animal shelters shared walls with living spaces. This was not coincidence. The warmth generated by cows, goats, and sheep radiated through shared barriers, reducing heat loss inside the home. Archaeological layouts and surviving structures support this practice across multiple regions and centuries. You notice how much warmer the shared wall feels compared to others. Pressing your hand against it, you sense the difference immediately. The heat is subtle but constant. Unlike fire, it does not need tending. It breathes, shifts, persists. There remains disagreement among historians about how intentional this design was in every case. Some suggest it emerged gradually through trial and error. Others argue it was a direct transfer of long-standing rural traditions. Regardless of origin, the result was the same. Warmth became communal, flowing between species. You move straw and bedding for the animals, layering it thickly. Dry bedding traps air and reduces heat loss from the ground, just as it does for you. Animals respond by settling more quickly, conserving their own warmth. In return, they share it. A curious observation from winter accounts describes settlers sleeping more soundly when animals were nearby, not just because of warmth, but because their presence signaled stability. Animals are sensitive to changes in weather and predators. Their calm was reassurance. You think briefly about the smells. Animal warmth comes with odor, manure, hayhide. These scents mix with wood smoke and fabric. The air becomes layered with life. Modern preferences would reject it instantly, but here it means survival. Cleanliness shifts meaning in winter. Warmth outranks comfort. Some scholars still examine whether close proximity to animals increased illness risk. Evidence suggests exposure did carry dangers, but winter forced trade-offs. Cold weakened immune systems rapidly. Warmth preserved them. People chose the risk they could manage. You return inside and feel the difference immediately. The room holds warmth longer tonight. Fire and body heat are not working alone. The structure itself has become a conduit, redistributing energy slowly and evenly. You sit and listen. Animals shift occasionally, a soft stomp, a breath. These sounds blend into the night rhythm. They are steady, predictable, not threatening. They help mark time when darkness erases visual cues. There is an old rural saying, recorded in several regions, that a quiet barn in winter means safety. Loud animals mean trouble. You listen carefully and feel reassured. Calm radiates outward, warming nerves as much as skin. You prepare the fire with this in mind. Slightly smaller tonight. The animals will do part of the work. Fuel can be saved. Planning extends warmth beyond the present moment. A lesser-known practice involved using animal fat rubbed into wooden door frames and window seams to reduce drafts. It sealed gaps and repelled moisture. The smell lingered, but the effect was noticeable. Everything here serves more than one purpose. You eat again lightly, then settle near the warm wall. The heat feels different from fire warmth, softer, deeper, less dramatic. It seeps rather than strikes. Your muscles respond by loosening further. As night deepens, the wind rises. You hear it test the shelter, pushing against walls, searching for weakness. Inside, the warmth holds. Bodies, human and animal, create a buffer the cold cannot easily penetrate. There is debate among researchers about whether animals were ever brought fully inside living spaces during extreme cold. Some accounts suggest yes, others deny it. Practices varied widely by culture and climate. What is clear is that boundaries blurred when survival demanded it. You lie down and feel warmth from multiple directions now. From beneath, from beside, from the wall, from within. The cold has fewer angles of attack. This layered defense feels deliberate, even elegant in its simplicity. You reflect briefly on how different this feels from modern separation between human and animal spaces. Here life is integrated. Heat, breath, movement, everything contributes. Nothing is wasted. Sleep comes more easily tonight. The shelter feels alive, not empty. You are surrounded by warmth that does not flicker or fade suddenly. It endures through the hours without asking for constant attention. Tomorrow, you'll begin to notice how community beyond your own walls shapes warmth as well. For now, you rest within a shared ecosystem, carried through the night by bodies working together, simply by being what they are. You begin to understand that warmth is rarely a solitary achievement. Beyond your own walls, beyond your animals and fire and bedding, there is something larger at work. People gather, they always have. In winter especially, isolation feels heavier than cold. Community becomes another layer of insulation. As daylight thins, you walk toward a nearby dwelling. Smoke rises from several roofs, at once thin columns leaning together in the wind. The sight alone brings comfort. Multiple fires mean shared survival. If one fails, another may still burn. It is well documented in settlement records that winter evenings often drew families together under a single roof. Not for celebration, but practicality. Fewer fires meant less fuel burned overall. Shared heat concentrated warmth. One large hearth outperformed many small ones, scattered thinly across the landscape. You enter and feel the difference immediately. The air is warmer, thicker with breath and smoke and life. Bodies cluster near the hearth. Tools rest against walls. Someone is mending fabric. Someone else stirs a pot. No one sits idle without purpose. Warmth circulates through motion and proximity. There remains ongoing discussion among historians about whether these gatherings strengthened social bonds or simply reflected necessity. Some diaries speak fondly of winter evenings, filled with quiet conversation and shared labour. Others mention tension crowding and frayed patience. Both experiences likely coexisted. Cold has a way of intensifying everything. You take a place near the fire and feel warmth reach you faster here than it ever does alone. Heat reflects off bodies, off walls, off shared surfaces. The room becomes a system. Even silence feels warmer when shared. A curious detail from frontier accounts describes people timing communal gatherings during the coldest weeks, then returning to separate homes as weather eased. Community flexed with the season. Togetherness expanded and contracted like breath. You notice how tasks are divided without much discussion. One person feeds the fire, another sharpens tools, someone else prepares food. Shared labour keeps everyone moving, preventing chill. Winter cooperation was rarely formal, it was intuitive. There is evidence suggesting that communal spaces were designed intentionally smaller than summer gathering areas. Less air to warm, more bodies per square foot, comfort through density. This ran counter to modern ideals of space and privacy, but it worked. You listen to the fire crackle and to the low murmur of voices. The sound itself feels insulating. Silence can feel cold when it stretches too long. Here, even quiet activity produces a gentle hum that fills the room. Some scholars continue to examine how shared winter living affected social hierarchies. Did status dissolve near the hearth, or did it become more visible? Accounts vary. In many cases, winter forced cooperation, regardless of rank. Warmth did not respect titles. You hold your hands out toward the fire and notice how quickly heat builds when multiple bodies surround it. The warmth rebounds, it stays close. This is physics, not sentiment, yet it feels reassuring all the same. A lesser-known practice involved rotating, who hosted communal evenings, distributing fuel burden across households. This prevented any one family from exhausting supplies too quickly. Planning extended warmth across the season. You eat together, passing bowls carefully. Hot food shared feels warmer than hot food eaten alone. Perhaps it cools more slowly. Perhaps the mind relaxes enough to notice it more fully. Either way, it matters. As the night deepens, someone banks the fire slightly higher than usual. More bodies mean more oxygen drawn. Fire management adapts again, always adjusting, always responsive. There is debate among researchers about how often illness spread in these communal settings. Close quarters increase risk, but cold exposure posed greater immediate danger. People chose the warmth they could see over threats they could not measure easily. You sit back and feel fatigue ease its grip. Being warm among others requires less effort. The burden is shared. Your body stops bracing so hard against the cold. Muscles soften, breath deepens. Stories emerge quietly. Not dramatic tales, just observations, weather signs, animal behavior. Small bits of knowledge passed casually. This exchange mattered. Information saved lives. Winter gatherings became informal schools where experience circulated freely. You notice children sleeping nearby, closer to the fire. Elders sit where warmth is strongest. Placement reflects care. The group arranges itself instinctively to protect those most vulnerable. This pattern appears again and again in winter accounts. Eventually, people begin to prepare for sleep. Some will stay. Others will return home together, timing departures to reduce exposure. Night travel is minimized. The cold is sharper after dark. You step back outside with a small group walking close, sharing body heat and breaking wind together. The path feels shorter. Cold feels less aggressive when faced collectively. Back in your shelter, the warmth from communal time lingers. Clothes hold heat. Body remembers it. You bank your fire lightly and settle in. You reflect on how survival here depends not only on skill, but on willingness to gather to share space and warmth and time. Winter strips away illusions of independence quickly. As you lie down, you carry the warmth of others with you, stored quietly in muscle and memory. Tomorrow, you will begin watching the sky more closely, learning how weather itself becomes another partner in this ongoing negotiation with cold. For now, you rest knowing you are not facing the season alone. The sky becomes your quiet instructor now. You notice it the moment you step outside, the way clouds hang low, heavy with promise, the way the air smells flatter before snow. Weather is no longer background, it is information. It tells you how warm tonight might be, how much wood to burn, how tightly to seal yourself in. You lift your face and feel the air. Dry cold bites sharper than damp cold. Windless cold settles. Wind-driven cold hunts. People once read these differences the way others read clocks. Long before instruments, they trusted skin breath and sound. It is generally accepted that early settlers relied on weather signs to plan heat management days in advance. A sudden drop in pressure, a halo around the moon, an unnatural stillness in the forest. These were cues to gather extra fuel, reinforce shelter, and prepare for deeper cold. You watch clouds thicken as afternoon fades. Snow is coming. Snow changes everything. It insulates the ground, softens sound, and reflects a little heat back upward. But it also blocks paths, dampens wood, and demands energy to move through. You adjust plans accordingly. There is ongoing discussion among historians about how accurate traditional weather lore truly was. Some signs align closely with modern meteorology. Others appear more symbolic than predictive. Yet when survival depended on anticipation rather than certainty, even partial accuracy had value. You close shutters earlier than usual. You hang an extra layer over the door. You bring more wood inside to dry. Each action feels calm, methodical. You are no longer reacting to cold, you are preparing for it. A small but fascinating detail from winter journals describes settlers listening to how sound travelled before storms. Voices carried farther. Axe strikes echoed longer. Snow muffled the world before it arrived. You test this now, tapping wood lightly. The sound lingers. You nod to yourself. Inside you shift sleeping arrangements again. Snow means quieter nights, but colder mornings. You position bedding closer to heat sources. You stack straw higher. You plan for stillness rather than movement. Snow traps you. You trap warmth. Some scholars continue to explore whether weather awareness reduced winter mortality significantly. Evidence suggests it did. Preparation mattered more than endurance. Those who read signs acted sooner and suffered less. You step outside one last time before dark. The sky is low now, pressing down. The world feels smaller, sound dulls, snowflakes begin hesitantly, then with confidence. They brush your face softly. Cold but not cruel. You return inside and close the shelter carefully. Snow begins to accumulate against walls. This is not danger yet. It is insulation forming naturally. You smile faintly at the thought. The earth continues to help. You feed the fire slightly more than usual, not for heat alone, but to dry the air before snow dampens everything. Moist coal creeps deeper than dry. You manage it proactively. There is debate among researchers about whether settlers viewed winter weather with fear or respect. Accounts suggest both. Storms killed, but they also provided cover insulation and a strange quiet that allowed rest. Snow forced stillness. Stillness conserved energy. As night deepens, snow falls steadily. The shelter grows quieter with each layer. Sound from outside fades almost completely. Inside, the fire crackles softly. Warmth holds. You lie down and feel the difference immediately. The air feels heavier, calmer. Cold presses less aggressively. Snow has sealed the world. You are enclosed within enclosure. You listen to the faint hiss of snow settling. It is a sound of patience, of waiting. You realize that winter is not a single enemy. It is many forces that sometimes work against you and sometimes for you. Learning which is which keeps you alive. Your body relaxes more easily tonight. Snow promises stability. No sudden temperature swings, no sharp winds, just steady cold that can be managed. As sleep approaches, you think about how watching the sky has become as important as tending fire. Knowledge of weather extends warmth beyond walls and blankets. It gives you time, which is the most valuable insulation of all. Tomorrow, you awake to a changed world, quieter and brighter. For now, you let snow do its work outside, while you stay warm inside, prepared, patient, and still. By the heart of winter, the idea of clear boundaries between inside and outside has softened almost completely. What once felt improper now feels practical. You open the shelter door and guide an animal closer, not with affection, but with calculation. Warmth follows mass. Breath follows life. The cold does not object to tradition, only to physics. You notice how the air changes immediately when an animal settles nearby. It is subtle but unmistakable. The space grows denser, warmer, faintly alive. Even without touching, heat radiates steadily. This is not a short burst like fire. It is constant, patient output. It is a well-established observation from rural winter life that animals were sometimes brought into enclosed spaces during the coldest spells. Smaller livestock dogs, even young animals, were sheltered closer to human sleeping areas when temperatures plunged. This was not sentimental. It was survival economics. You arrange straw thickly where the animal will rest, Dry bedding insulates hooves and bellies, just as it insulates your own body. The animal settles more quickly when the ground does not steal heat. In return, its warmth fills the space for hours without demand. There remains discussion among historians about how common full indoor animal housing truly was. Some records emphasize shared walls and adjacent spaces rather than complete cohabitation. Others describe extreme winters where animals and people shared single rooms. Practices varied, shaped by climate, culture, and tolerance. You listen to the animal's breathing, slow, steady, reliable. It becomes part of the night rhythm. Each exhale adds warmth to the air you share. Each movement redistributes heat gently. You begin to understand why people described animals as winter companions rather than property during these months. A curious detail from cold weather accounts mentions people sleeping more soundly when animals were close, not just for warmth but for early warning. Animals sense changes humans miss. A sudden stir might signal a storm shift or danger. Their presence offered both heat and awareness. You notice the smells again. Hay, hide, earth. They thicken the air, but they also ground you. These are the smells of life continuing despite cold. Cleanliness is redefined. Warmth takes priority over freshness. Some scholars have explored whether animal proximity reduced fuel consumption significantly. Evidence suggests it did. Even small increases in ambient temperature reduced firewood needs over long nights. In a season measured in stored logs, this mattered. You adjust the fire slightly lower than usual tonight. The room holds warmth longer. Heat from bodies and fire overlaps, smoothing temperature swings. This layered approach feels intentional now. Nothing works alone. Everything supports something else. You think briefly about disease, about risk. Winter forced difficult trade-offs. Cold weakened bodies quickly. Illness lingered longer. People chose warmth because it worked immediately. The calculus was brutal, but clear. The animal shifts, straw rustling softly. You feel the warmth roll outward again. It is not dramatic, it does not announce itself, it simply exists. That reliability is comforting in a season defined by uncertainty. You lie down and notice how much easier it is to relax tonight. Your muscles do not brace as hard. Your breath slows naturally. Warmth from a living body feels different from heat produced by flame. It feels shared rather than generated. There is continued debate among researchers about how winter cohabitation with animals shaped long-term human-animal relationships. Some argue it deepened bonds, others suggest it was purely pragmatic. Standing here, lying here, you suspect it was both. Necessity often creates connection. As the night deepens, the shelter remains quiet and warm. Snow presses outside, wind loses interest. Inside, heat circulates gently without effort. You bank the fire lightly and trust the rest to bodies and walls. You fall asleep with the steady assurance that warmth does not always need to be made. Sometimes it simply needs to be allowed closer. In winter, survival often meant letting go of separation and embracing shared heat wherever it could be found. Tomorrow, you will turn your attention to how light and openings are managed to protect this warmth. For now, you rest surrounded by breath and body and quiet, carried through another cold night by life itself. Morning light arrives cautiously, now filtered and weakened by snow, stacked against shutters and walls. It does not burst in. It seeps. You notice how different the room feels before you even move. The air is warmer than it has any right to be. Quiet, too. Snow has wrapped the shelter in a soft barrier, sealing sound and trapping heat like an extra blanket pulled over the world. You rise and go first to the openings. Windows, shutters, door coverings. These are no longer simple access points. They are valves. You manage them carefully because every opening is a negotiation between light and warmth. Early winter dwellings were often built with very small windows, sometimes no more than narrow slits or oiled parchment panels. This was not poor design. It was deliberate. Glass was rare, expensive, and inefficient at holding heat. Light was welcomed, but not at the expense of survival. You lift a shutter just enough to let pale daylight in. The room brightens immediately, but you feel the temperature shift at the same time. Cold air spills inward, curious and quick. You close the shutter again slightly, finding the narrow balance where light enters but warmth mostly stays. There is ongoing discussion among historians about how much settlers valued daylight during winter versus the risk of heat loss. Some accounts describe people tolerating darker interiors for weeks. Others suggest creative solutions to maximize light without drafts. What is clear is that light affected mood as much as temperature affected bodies. You notice how snow outside reflects light inward, amplifying what little sun there is. This natural brightness helps. It lifts the gloom. Snow becomes an ally again, not just insulation, but illumination. You adjust reflective surfaces inside the shelter, light-colored fabrics, polished tools, even pale wood. These bounce light deeper into the room. Settlers did not use the language of optics, but they noticed the effect. Brighter rooms felt warmer, even when temperatures did not change. A small but telling detail from winter accounts mentions people rearranging living spaces seasonally so that work areas sat closer to windows in winter, even if it meant crowding. Light was rationed like fuel, used where it mattered most. You open the door briefly to knock snow away from its base. If left too long, melting and refreezing could seal it shut. This happened often enough to become a quiet fear. People checked doors regularly, even during storms, to ensure escape routes remained. Some scholars have debated whether early settlers feared being snowed in more for cold or for darkness. Isolation cut off supplies, communication, and light. Both factors weighed heavily on the mind. Warmth alone was not enough. You needed to see. You let the door close quickly again. The room settles back into its insulated hush. The animal nearby shifts and resettles, releasing another wave of warmth. The fire stirs faintly under ash. Everything works together. You spend part of the morning adjusting coverings, extra fabric layered over the window frames, straw packed into gaps, wooden shutters reinforced. These small acts feel almost meditative now. You know what you are listening for. The sound of wind slipping through, the feeling of chill on knuckles. When neither appears, you have done enough. There is a curious note in one winter journal describing settlers rubbing ash mixed with fat around window seams to reduce drafts. It left dark smudges but sealed gaps effectively. Again, appearance bowed to function. As daylight strengthens slightly toward midday, you allow a bit more light in. Warmth holds thanks to snow and layered defences. You feel a quiet satisfaction. The room feels alive but protected, bright enough to work, warm enough to endure. You prepare food near the brightest area. Light makes tasks easier. Shadows retreat. The mind feels clearer. You understand now why managing light mattered beyond visibility. It shaped morale. There remains debate among researchers about how prolonged darkness affected winter psychology. Some accounts suggest deep melancholy, others describe increased storytelling, singing, and shared activity as counterweights. Light was scarce, but connection filled some of that gap. As afternoon fades again, you reverse the process. Shutters close earlier, openings seal. Light is traded back for heat without hesitation. Night comes sooner than you would like, but you no longer resent it. Darkness here is part of the rhythm. You sit near the hearth and notice how little wood you need tonight. Snow animals shared heat, and careful sealing have done most of the work. Fire becomes a supplement rather than a struggle. You lie down and feel the shelter hold steady. Light has been managed, warmth has been preserved. The world outside may be buried and frozen, but inside you have shaped a space that responds to your care. Tomorrow, you will begin to feel the weight of the season more deeply as supplies shrink and days shorten further. For now, you rest in a room that balances light and warmth just well enough to let sleep come gently. The cold changes its voice after weeks like this. You begin to hear it differently, not just as temperature, but as pressure. It presses on supplies, on patience, on attention. By now, winter is no longer novel. It is familiar, and familiarity brings its own dangers. Complacency can be colder than wind. You check stores first thing in the morning. Firewood stack, food containers, bedding condition. Nothing dramatic has changed overnight, but the numbers matter. How many logs remain? How thick the straw still feels? How often the pot has been filled? Early settlers learned to count quietly, constantly, because running out rarely announced itself until it was too late. Surviving records make it clear that anxiety over fuel was a persistent winter companion. Letters mention firewood more often than weather. Not poetically, but practically. Wood piles were inspected the way modern people check bank accounts. Warmth had a measurable currency. You run your hand over the remaining logs. They feel lighter than they used to, seasoned, ready, but fewer. You adjust today's plan immediately. Smaller fire, more movement, extra reliance on shared heat and insulation. Winter demands flexibility. There is continued scholarly discussion about how often settlers misjudged fuel needs during their first winters. Some accounts describe communities forced to dismantle fences, furniture, even parts of homes to burn. Others suggest careful planners fared well. Experience separated the two groups quickly. You step outside and notice how the air has changed. It feels heavier, less sharp. A sign of approaching thaw, perhaps, or simply a temporary shift. You do not trust it yet. Winter has taught you skepticism. Inside, you repair clothing and tools instead of burning extra wood. Mending generates warmth through movement and preserves resources. This was a common winter occupation. Hands stayed busy, fire stayed small, time passed productively. A curious detail from settlement life describes people deliberately saving the best firewood for night and using lower quality wood during the day. Daytime cold could be fought with motion. Nighttime stillness required stronger heat. This prioritization was learned through bitter nights. You feel fatigue differently now. It is not acute. It is cumulative. Weeks of vigilance weigh on the body. Muscles ache more slowly. Sleep restores less fully. Warmth still comes, but it requires more attention. Researchers still debate how winter stress affected decision-making. Some suggest prolonged cold dulled judgment. Others argue it sharpened focus. Both may be true. Under constant pressure, some minds narrow, others clarify. You take a moment to sit near the hearth and breathe deeply. Warmth spreads slowly. You let it. Rushing only wastes energy. You have learned patience as a survival skill. You notice how your perception of comfort has shifted. What once felt barely tolerable now feels sufficient. Expectations have changed. This mental adaptation may be as important as any physical technique. Winter reshapes standards quietly. Outside, snow begins to soften. It settles differently, less crisp. You know what this can mean. Thaw brings moisture. Moisture brings new cold risks. Dampness steals heat faster than dry frost ever did. You prepare accordingly. Extra layers hung near the fire. Bedding checked for moisture. Shoes dried carefully. Early settlers often feared damp cold more than deep freeze. Records mention bone cold that seeped inward and refused to leave. There is discussion among historians about whether thaw periods caused more illness than extreme cold. Evidence suggests they did. Wet conditions weakened bodies already stressed by winter. Warmth strategies had to adjust again. You alter your routine slightly. More fire during damp hours. Less reliance on movement alone. You stay alert to smells. Damp straw smells wrong. Damp wood sounds wrong. Your senses have been trained by necessity. A small but telling practice appears in winter accounts, describing people changing sleeping arrangements, during thaws moving closer to heat sources again. Flexibility mattered, rigid routines failed. As afternoon passes, you find yourself thinking ahead more often. How long until true spring? How long supplies must last? You do not count days, you count conditions. Snow depth, day length, animal behavior. Animals know before you do. They shift, they eat differently. They rest differently. You watch them closely. Their patterns inform yours. There remains debate among researchers about how accurately early settlers predicted seasonal change without instruments. Many relied on experience rather than certainty. They prepared for the worst and hoped for the best. Hope without preparation was dangerous. Preparation without hope was exhausting. You balance both now. You plan carefully but allow yourself moments of calm. Warmth is not just physical, it is psychological. Anxiety drains heat faster than cold. As evening approaches, you light the fire gently. Not large, not small, just enough. You sit close and let warmth settle into tired muscles. You have survived long enough to understand that endurance is quiet. You lie down and feel the bed respond as before, straw still dry, feathers still lofted, body still warm enough. That is enough. Outside, winter continues its slow negotiation with the land. Inside, you have learned to negotiate back, not through force but through awareness, adjustment and patience. Tomorrow, you will face the longest stretch yet when days feel thin and nights stretch endlessly. For now, you rest conserving warmth and strength, ready to meet what comes next. The day begins quietly, almost deceptively so. The cold is still there, but it has softened its edges. This is the moment winter likes to test you. When things seem manageable, when vigilance loosens just a little, that is when mistakes slip in. You have learned not to trust calm too easily. You notice the wind first. It has shifted direction overnight. Not stronger, just different. It finds new seams, new angles. Drafts appear where there were none before. Winter never stops looking for weaknesses, neither can you. You move methodically around the shelter, checking walls, floor, edges, roof lines. Wherever you feel a whisper of cold, you respond. Insulation is never finished. It degrades, settles, shifts. What worked last week may fail today. Historical records consistently show that early settlers relied on improvised insulation far beyond what formal building methods provided. Moss, straw, dried leaves, animal hair, rags, even old paper were packed into gaps. Nothing was too humble if it blocked air. You gather materials with new eyes. Dead leaves are no longer debris. They are insulation waiting to be used. You dry them carefully near the fire before packing them into cracks. Dry matters. Moisture undoes everything. There remains active discussion among historians about how effective these materials truly were. Some argue they offered minimal benefit. Others point to layered approaches where small gains compounded into meaningful warmth retention. Living here, you know which side you favour. You stuff a seam near the floor and feel the change immediately. Cold no longer crawls along your ankles. That small comfort feels enormous. Winter teaches appreciation for marginal improvements. A curious note from a settler's letter describes using old wool socks nailed flat over wall cracks. The solution was inelegant, but it worked. Warmth does not care about appearances. You smile slightly at the thought. You work slowly, fingers stiffening and loosening in cycles as you move between cold edges and the fire. This rhythm feels familiar now. Adjust, warm, adjust again. The shelter becomes a living thing you tend. You check the roof next. Snow weight has shifted, some insulation has compressed. You add more material where you can reach, mindful of balance. Roof failures in winter were catastrophic. Heat escaped upward fastest. Early builders learned to overcompensate. There is ongoing debate among researchers about whether settlers understood convection in scientific terms. Probably not, but they understood its effects intimately. Warm air rose, cold air sank. Design followed observation. You notice how sound changes as insulation improves. Wind noise dulls, the shelter grows quieter. Silence becomes a signal of success. Loud houses are cold houses. You take a moment to rest, sitting near the warm wall, shared with animals. Heat radiates steadily. You feel it soak into your back. This is passive warmth at its best. It costs nothing once established. You think about how much of winter survival relies on noticing small things. A new draft, a damp smell, a creak that sounds wrong. Early settlers became excellent listeners. Attention saved energy. Inattention wasted it. Some scholars still explore how insulation practices varied regionally. Forested areas offered abundant material. Plains demanded creativity. Snow itself became insulation in treeless landscapes piled deliberately against walls. The environment shaped the method. You step outside briefly and shovel snow toward the shelter's base, packing it carefully. Snow insulates when handled correctly. It traps air. It blocks wind. Used poorly, it melts and refreezes into a problem. Used well, it becomes a wall. You remember reading that in some northern regions, entire winter homes were built from snow. The idea once seemed impossible. Now it feels logical. Air trapped within frozen water can be warmer than bare air. You return inside and feel the difference, almost immediately. The floor edge no longer bleeds cold. The room holds warmth longer between fire feedings. This means fuel saved, time gained. There is debate among historians about how often settlers revisited insulation midwinter versus relying on initial construction. Evidence suggests constant maintenance was common. Winter was dynamic. Solutions had to be too. You tidy the remaining materials and store them for later. You know there will be another draft, another shift. Preparedness now saves effort later. As afternoon fades, you sit quietly and listen. The shelter feels calm. Wind sounds distant. The fire burns low but steady. Animals rest. You realize that insulation is not just about blocking cold. It is about creating predictability. When warmth behaves consistently, the mind rests. Anxiety drains less energy. You lie down later with a quiet sense of accomplishment. Nothing dramatic happened today. No storm, no crisis, just small improvements that made the night gentler. Tomorrow the season will ask more of you. It always does. But tonight the shelter holds. The cold stays outside, and that is enough. You wake to a sense that the house itself has shifted its posture. Not dramatically, just subtly, like a person turning in sleep. Winter has deepened, and with it the way the shelter is used begins to change again. What worked a month ago now needs adjustment. This season does not reward fixed thinking. You notice it first in how you move through the space. Areas that once felt tolerable now feel wasteful. Too much air, too much distance from heat. Early settlers did not keep houses static through winter. Interiors migrated inward as cold intensified. Historical descriptions make it clear that many families effectively abandoned parts of their homes during the coldest months. Extra rooms were closed off doors, sealed furniture, stacked to block passages. Living space shrank intentionally. Fewer cubic feet meant easier warmth. You begin doing the same. A corner that once held tools is now sealed behind fabric and straw. A rarely used doorway is blocked completely. You do not miss the space. You feel relief almost immediately. The remaining area holds heat better, like a smaller pot on the same flame. There is ongoing academic discussion about whether these seasonal house changes were planned from the beginning or improvised as winter progressed. Some structures show evidence of intentional winter layouts. Others suggest families adapted reactively. Likely both occurred, shaped by experience and surprise. You move sleeping areas closer to the warmest wall. Beds migrate. Storage relocates. Nothing is fixed. The house becomes flexible, responding to temperature rather than aesthetics. A small but memorable note from a winter journal mentions people hanging heavy blankets across ceiling beams to lower the effective height of rooms. This trapped warm air below and reduced heat loss upward. The ceiling came down for winter, then rose again in spring. You test this idea now, stringing fabric across part of the room. The difference is immediate. Warmth lingers at head height instead of escaping. The space feels cozier, calmer. Sound softens too, as if the room exhales. Some scholars continue to examine how these interior changes affected daily life and morale. Smaller spaces could feel oppressive, but they also felt safer. Warmth often outweighed discomfort. Winter priorities were clear. You notice how routines adapt automatically. Work clusters near heat. Meals are prepared where warmth is strongest. Tools are stored within reach to avoid unnecessary movement into colder zones. Efficiency becomes instinct. You rearrange furniture again, pushing heavier pieces against outer walls. This adds mass and reduces drafts. Wood and fabric absorb cold before it reaches living space. Settlers did this often, turning furniture into insulation. There is debate among researchers about whether people understood thermal mass consciously or simply observed outcomes. Either way, the practice persisted. Experience taught faster than theory ever could. You step back and look at the transformed space. It no longer resembles a house in the modern sense. It feels more like a nest. Everything unnecessary has been stripped away. Everything remaining serves warmth or survival. A curious detail appears in some winter accounts, describing people painting or whitewashing inner walls during winter. The lighter surfaces reflected firelight, better making rooms feel brighter and warmer psychologically. Light and warmth blended in the mind. You sit near the hearth and feel how little wood is needed now. The fire burns smaller, but the room stays warm. Fuel lasts longer. Anxiety eases slightly. These changes matter more than any single innovation. There is continued discussion among historians about how often families rotated these seasonal layouts. Some suggest changes happened gradually over weeks. Others indicate distinct winter and summer configurations. The truth likely depended on climate severity. You prepare bedding again, noticing how closer proximity to walls now brings extra warmth rather than cold. Insulation has shifted the balance. What once leaked heat now holds it. You think about how this flexibility contrasts with modern homes designed to remain unchanged year-round. Here the house is a living participant in survival. It adapts with you. As evening arrives, you close off the last unused section. The remaining space glows warmly with firelight. Shadows feel closer but not threatening. Enclosing warmth feels protective. You lie down and sense how the smaller space responds to your presence. Heat builds faster. Breath warms the air more effectively. Sleep comes easier when the room cooperates. There remains scholarly debate about whether these shrinking living spaces influence social dynamics. Did closeness breed conflict or connection? Accounts suggest both. Winter intensified everything, but warmth softened sharp edges. You breathe slowly, listening to the quiet hum of a house, doing what it was reshaped to do. Outside, winter continues its long work. Inside, you have adjusted once more, staying just ahead of the cold. Tomorrow you will begin to feel the strain of the season, on bodies more clearly noticing how illness and chill intertwine. For now, you rest in a space that has learned like you have to bend rather than break. You feel it before you admit it. A tightening in the chest that has nothing to do with cold air. A habit of glancing at the woodpile more often than necessary. Winter has entered its most anxious phase, not the beginning when optimism still lingers, and not the end when hope returns, but the long middle where supplies quietly decide your fate. Firewood has become a presence in your thoughts. Each log represents hours of warmth, and each hour matters. You count without meaning to. 1, 2, 3 nights if you are careful, 4 if the weather holds. This arithmetic hums constantly beneath everything you do. Surviving documents from early settlements reveal that fear of running out of fuel was one of the most common winter worries. People wrote about wood shortages more urgently than hunger. Cold kills faster. Hunger gives warning. Firewood sat at the intersection of comfort and survival. You adjust today's fire instinctively, feeding it less, banking it earlier. You rely more heavily on insulation, on shared heat, on movement. Conservation becomes your primary skill. Not hoarding, but stretching, making warmth last longer than it should. There remains discussion among historians about how often early settlers truly ran out of firewood completely. Some accounts describe desperate measures taken late in winter. Others suggest communities pooled resources to prevent catastrophe. Outcomes varied widely, shaped by preparation and cooperation. You step outside and scan the landscape for fallen branches, dead wood overlooked earlier. What once seemed too small now looks useful. Nothing is beneath consideration anymore. Thin sticks become kindling. Old fences become fuel. The line between structure and firewood blurs. A peculiar detail from winter letters describes settlers burning dried animal dung when wood was scarce. It burned hot enough to help, though the smell was unpleasant. This practice was common in treeless regions and adopted reluctantly elsewhere when desperation set in. Warmth demanded sacrifice. You collect what you can and bring it inside to dry. Wet fuel wastes effort. You know this now as instinct. Preparation always precedes relief. Inside, you repair the hearth to improve efficiency. Stones are repositioned, gaps sealed, fire responds immediately, burning cleaner and slower. Small improvements compound. You feel a quiet satisfaction. Anxiety eases slightly when action replaces worry. Some scholars have explored whether fear itself increased fuel consumption. Stress led people to burn larger fires for reassurance. Those who managed fear conserved better. Winter survival required emotional regulation as much as technical skill. You sit near the fire and practice patience. Flames do not need to leap to provide warmth. Embers do not need to glow brightly to survive. Quiet heat is efficient heat. You learn to trust it. You think about neighbours again. Community matters most when supplies thin. Sharing warmth is easier than sharing fuel. One hearth burns more efficiently than many. Cooperation extends resources in ways isolation cannot. Historical accounts describe families consolidating households late in winter, closing multiple homes to keep one warm. Furniture was moved, bedding shared, privacy surrendered. Warmth won the argument every time. You prepare tonight's bedding with extra care, more insulation, better sealing, less reliance on fire. You place warm stones strategically. You adjust sleeping positions to maximize retained heat. There is ongoing scholarly debate about whether late winter was the most dangerous period or the earliest weeks. Evidence suggests the middle stretch, when exhaustion and scarcity overlapped, posed the greatest risk. Bodies were tired, supplies dwindled, mistakes multiplied. You lie down and listen to the fire settle into embers. The sound is quieter than before. It should worry you, but it does not. You trust your preparation. You trust your adjustments. Outside, winter remains unmoved by your concern. Inside, you have learned to meet it with calculation rather than fear. Firewood will last tonight. That is enough. You close your eyes and let the warmth fade slowly rather than fighting it. Tomorrow, you will continue the careful dance between need and restraint. For now, you rest conserving not just heat, but strength. The cold does something subtle to the body over time. It does not arrive all at once. It settles in layers the way frost builds on glass. You notice it first in small ways, fingers that feel clumsy longer in the morning, joints that protest when you stand too quickly, a cough that lingers just enough to make you pay attention. Illness in winter does not announce itself dramatically. It creeps in alongside chill, and the two are difficult to separate. Early settlers often struggled to tell where cold ended and sickness began. Both drained strength. Both demanded warmth as treatment. Accounts from the period frequently describe winter ailments as conditions of weakness rather than specific diseases. People spoke of being laid low by cold, by damp, by exposure. Without modern medicine, warmth itself was often the first and only remedy available. You respond instinctively now. When you feel a chill that does not lift with movement, you add layers. When breath feels shallow, you sit closer to the fire. When joints ache, you warm them before work. These adjustments feel automatic, learned through repetition rather than instruction. There is still lively debate among historians about how much winter illness was caused directly by cold versus malnutrition or poor sanitation. Evidence suggests it was rarely just one factor. Cold weakened the body's defenses, making everything else more dangerous. You prepare warm drinks more often now, not because you are thirsty, but because heat soothes. Warm liquid spreads comfort from the inside, easing tension in the chest and throat. This practice appears again and again in winter letters. Tea if available, broth more often, plain hot water when nothing else remained. A curious practice described in several regions involved placing warm compresses on the chest or back at night to ward off chills. Cloths heated by the fire were wrapped carefully to avoid burns. The warmth was believed to drive illness out. Whether or not it did, it brought relief. You notice how sleep changes when you are unwell. Shallow at first, then deeper when warmth holds. Settlers often slept longer during illness, conserving energy the body needed to heal. Winter forced rest in a way summer never allowed. Some scholars have explored whether shared sleeping increased illness spread during winter. Close quarters did raise risk, but isolation carried its own dangers. A sick person left alone could lose warmth quickly. Many communities chose shared heat despite the risk. You adjust sleeping arrangements accordingly. The most vulnerable stay closest to heat. Extra bedding is added. Fire is banked slightly higher at night despite fuel concerns. Illness shifts priorities. Warmth becomes treatment rather than comfort. You listen to breathing in the dark, a cough here, a sigh there. These sounds carry meaning now. They guide decisions. Who needs more warmth? Who can manage without? It is generally understood that winter mortality rates were highest among the very young and the very old. Protecting them shaped household behaviour. Adults often accepted discomfort to keep others warm. Winter sharpened caretaking instincts. You prepare food with this in mind. Easier to digest, warmer, less demanding on the body. Thick soups, soft grains, fat still important but balanced with gentleness. Eating becomes part of healing. There is continued discussion among researchers about how mental state influenced winter health. Anxiety weakened bodies. Calm supported recovery. Warmth helped both. A quiet room, steady fire, predictable routine. These were as medicinal as any herb. You keep the shelter drier now. Dampness aggravates everything. Bedding is aired near the fire whenever possible. Wet clothing is changed quickly. Even small moisture feels dangerous when illness threatens. A small detail from winter accounts describes people sleeping with scarves loosely wrapped around the neck to protect the throat from cold air. It sounds simple, but it helped. You try it tonight and feel the difference immediately. You slow the pace of the day slightly. Not everything must be done at once. Overexertion invites setbacks. Winter teaches patience in healing as well as survival. Some historians still debate whether settlers recognized contagious illness in winter or attributed symptoms solely to cold. Records suggest awareness varied. People noticed patterns, but explanations remained practical rather than theoretical. Warmth helped. That was enough. As evening approaches, you tend the fire carefully. Clean burn, steady heat, smoke minimized. Irritated lungs need gentler air. You adjust vents, watch flame, color, trust your senses. You lie down and feel warmth gather slowly around you. Body aches, ease, breath deepens. Sleep arrives not as escape but as repair. Outside, winter continues without concern. Inside, you have learned that warmth is protection medicine and reassurance all at once. It does not cure everything, but it gives the body a fighting chance. Tomorrow, you will turn your attention to those who need the most care and how winter reshapes responsibility within the household. For now, you rest wrapped in heat. You have learned to use wisely, letting the body recover one quiet night at a time. Responsibility feels heavier in winter. Not because there is more to do, but because the margin for error narrows. You notice it most when you look at the smallest and the oldest among you. Their bodies hold heat less stubbornly. Their signals are quieter. Winter demands that you pay closer attention. Children feel cold differently. They burn energy quickly, then crash just as fast. Elders conserve energy, but once chilled struggle to recover warmth. Early households learned this pattern without explanation or charts. Care flowed toward those least able to generate or retain heat on their own. Surviving household accounts often describe winter routines built around protecting the vulnerable first. The warmest sleeping spots, the thickest bedding, the closest place to the fire. These were rarely claimed by strength or status. They were assigned by need. You adjust the room instinctively now. A child is placed between adults at night, surrounded by warmth. An elder sits where heat pools during the day. Movement patterns change. Work slows when someone shows signs of fatigue or chill. Winter enforces a hierarchy of care. There remains discussion among historians about how often these arrangements were formalized versus instinctive. Some diaries describe explicit rules, others suggest silent understanding. In either case, the result was the same. Survival required attention to others, not just oneself. You notice how illness changes the entire household rhythm. When one person weakens, everyone adapts. Fires burn slightly hotter. Food is prepared differently. Tasks are redistributed. Winter compresses lives together tightly. A curious detail from period letters describes adults sleeping in shifts during severe cold spells, staying awake to tend fires or monitor children and elders. Sleep was sacrificed to ensure warmth stayed steady. Exhausting, yes, but effective. You watch breathing more closely now. You listen for changes in tone, depth, rhythm. These sounds tell you when someone needs more warmth or rest. Winter sharpens perception. You learn to read subtle cues. It is broadly recognized that caregiving roles often shifted seasonally. Those who labored hardest in summer took on quieter, watchful roles in winter. Strength was measured differently. Endurance became patience. You prepare food with a care, cutting pieces smaller, cooking longer, making textures easier to manage. Warmth and nourishment work together. A fed body holds heat better. A warm body digests more easily. The cycle reinforces itself. There is ongoing scholarly debate about how much emotional stress winter caregiving placed on families. Some accounts speak of closeness and shared purpose. Others hint at strain and exhaustion. Both can be true at once. Winter magnifies everything. You notice how children adapt quickly when routines feel secure. Warmth, predictability, shared space. They sleep more soundly. Elders too relax when heat is reliable. Anxiety drains warmth faster than cold. You check bedding again before nightfall. Extra layers added where needed. Gaps sealed. You make sure no one lies near drafts. You test with your hand, feeling for whispers of cold. A small but telling practice described in winter journals mentions warming clothing for children and elders before they dressed in the morning. Cold garments stole heat immediately. Warm ones eased the transition into the day. You do this now and see the relief it brings. You keep the fire steadier tonight, even if it costs more fuel. Care shifts priorities. Winter teaches that resources exist to be used when needed, not hoarded at the expense of life. Some researchers still examine how these winter caregiving practices influence long-term family bonds. Shared hardship can divide or unite. In many cases, winter became a defining memory, shaping relationships for years after. You sit quietly and observe. The room feels settled, breathing is even, heat holds. There is no drama in this moment, only vigilance and quiet competence. As night deepens, you remain alert without being tense. You know where warmth is strongest. You know who needs it most. This knowledge is heavy but grounding. It gives purpose to the long hours. You lie down eventually, close enough to listen, far enough to rest. Sleep comes lighter when responsibility lingers, but it comes nonetheless. Warmth makes it possible. Outside, winter remains indifferent. Inside, care reshapes how warmth is shared, prioritized and preserved. Survival becomes collective rather than individual. Tomorrow, you will notice how different regions adapted these practices in their own ways, shaped by land and climate. For now, you rest knowing that warmth in winter is not just something you build or burn. It is something you give. By now, you understand that winter does not arrive the same way everywhere. The cold you face is shaped by the land beneath your feet, by forests or plains, by coastlines or mountains. Early settlers learned quickly that strategies for warmth were never universal. They were regional, responsive, and often improvised from whatever the environment offered. You imagine standing farther north where forests stretch endlessly. Wood is abundant, but daylight is scarce. Fires burn often, but insulation matters just as much. In these places, homes were built lower, tighter, closer to the earth. Heat was guarded fiercely because it had farther to travel through long nights. It is well established through historical records that settlers in heavily forested regions relied extensively on timber, not just for fuel, but for structure. Thick log walls provided natural insulation, especially when gaps were carefully chinked with clay and fibre. These houses felt heavy grounded and slow to change temperature. You contrast this with open plains where trees were rare and wind was relentless. Settlers there faced a different challenge. Fuel was scarce, wind was constant, They adapted by building with sod-stacking blocks of earth thick enough to stop air movement entirely. These sod houses stayed cool in summer and surprisingly warm in winter. There remains scholarly discussion about whether sod houses were a last resort or a preferred solution once people understood their insulating value. Some accounts describe initial reluctance followed by appreciation once winters proved survivable inside them. The earth itself became shelter again, just as it had earlier in your journey. You think about coastal regions next. Damp cold behaves differently. It seeps rather than strikes. Fire helps, but moisture steals warmth relentlessly. Settlers near the sea learned to prioritize ventilation during dry moments and seal tightly when fog rolled in. Clothing choices mattered more. Wool became essential. A curious detail from coastal winter accounts mentions people hanging nets and sails along interior walls to block drafts. These materials were readily available and trapped air effectively. The smell of salt lingered, but warmth held. Mountain settlements faced yet another variation. Altitude thinned air and intensified cold. Snow came earlier and stayed longer. Houses were built with steep roofs to shed weight and prevent collapse. Insulation focused upward as much as outward. Heat loss through the roof was the greatest enemy. Researchers continue to examine how much knowledge settlers brought with them versus how much they learned locally. Many arrived with assumptions shaped by distant climates. Those assumptions were corrected quickly. Survival favored those who adapted rather than insisted. You imagine how these regional differences shaped daily routines. In forests, wood chopping dominated. On plains, fuel scavenging and conservation ruled. Along coasts, drying and sealing became obsessions. In mountains, snow management defined every day. There is ongoing debate among historians about whether certain regions experienced higher winter mortality due to inadequate adaptation. Evidence suggests early years were hardest everywhere, but outcomes improved as local knowledge accumulated and spread. You realize now that what you have learned is not a single method, but a mindset. Observe, adjust. Use what is abundant, compensate for what is scarce. This flexibility kept people alive across wildly different landscapes. You feel gratitude for the earth beneath you, whatever form it takes. Soil, stone, wood, snow. Each offers warmth when understood properly. None offer mercy when ignored. As evening approaches, you prepare your shelter with renewed respect for place. You seal where wind comes from. You insulate where cold settles. You orient yourself not just to temperature, but to geography. You lie down and think about how many variations of this night exist across the land. Different houses, different fuels, same cold, same need for warmth. Tomorrow, you will turn inward again toward belief, patience, and the quiet mental tools people used when physical warmth was not enough. For now, you rest knowing that survival has always been local, shaped by listening closely to where you stand. There comes a point in winter when technique alone no longer carries you. You have insulated, adjusted, shared, conserved, and still the nights stretch long and the cold presses on, patience as much as skin. This is when people in the past leaned on something quieter. Belief, routine, endurance that had less to do with heat and more to do with meaning. You notice it in yourself first as a change in pace. Movement slow not from weakness, but from deliberation. Rushing wastes energy, calm preserves it. Winter rewards steadiness. People learn to endure not by fighting the season, but by accepting its tempo. Many historical accounts show that faith in some form played a central role in how settlers coped with winter hardship. This did not always mean formal religion. It could be prayer, superstition, seasonal rituals, or simply trust that spring would come, because it always had before. Hope itself became a form of warmth. You find yourself repeating small routines, morning fire check, evening bedding adjustment, a few familiar words spoken quietly before sleep. These actions anchor you. They give shape to days that might otherwise blur into endless cold. There remains discussion among historians about how much belief actually influenced survival outcomes versus morale alone. Some argue it provided psychological resilience, that translated into better decision-making. Others suggest it simply made suffering more bearable. Both effects matter. You recall a curious winter custom recorded in several settlements, where families marked each passing week of winter with a simple symbol scratched into wood or stone, not to count days precisely, but to remind themselves that time was moving. Winter felt endless only when it went unmeasured. You light the fire tonight with a familiar rhythm, almost without thinking. Hands know what to do. You do not need to watch the flame closely anymore. Trust has replaced vigilance. This trust is earned, built over many quiet nights that did not end badly. Some scholars continue to explore whether winter endurance was taught explicitly or learned implicitly through observation. Children absorbed it by watching adults remain calm in discomfort. Endurance was modeled, not explained. You sit quietly and listen to the sounds you now associate with safety. Fire breathing softly, wind kept at bay, animal warmth nearby. These sounds reassure you more than any promise could. You think about patience differently now. It is no longer passive waiting. It is active restraint. Choosing not to burn extra wood, choosing not to panic during long nights, choosing to trust preparations you have already made. There is an old saying preserved in winter letters that cold teaches people who they are when nothing is easy. Comfort hides character. Winter reveals it. You feel that truth settle gently rather than harshly. You prepare for sleep and notice how little anxiety you carry compared to earlier weeks. The fear of immediate danger has faded. What remains is persistence, the quiet decision to keep going. Some historians debate whether communities with strong shared beliefs fared better through harsh winters. Evidence suggests cooperation and shared purpose reduced despair. Whether belief created unity or unity created belief is less clear. You lie down and let the day end without resistance. The bed is familiar. The shelter holds. The cold stays where it belongs. You do not ask more of the night than it can give. Outside, winter continues its slow work, indifferent and patient. Inside, you have learned to meet it with the same patience. Endurance is not dramatic. It is quiet, repetitive, and surprisingly gentle when accepted. Tomorrow, you will find comfort in small rituals and moments that make winter not just survivable, but almost familiar. For now, you rest steady and calm, carried forward by patience rather than force. Comfort changes shape in winter. It shrinks, becoming smaller and more precious, until a single warm moment can carry you through hours of cold. You begin to notice these moments, now not because they are grand, but because they arrive quietly and leave slowly. You wake and warm your hands around a cup held close to your chest. The liquid is simple, maybe just hot water or thin broth, but the heat spreads deliberately. It is not the same as sitting near the fire. It moves inward, radiating through ribs and shoulders. For a moment, the cold loosens its grip. Small comforts like this appear often in winter records. A warm drink before sleep, heated stones tucked under a blanket, a patch of sunlight on the floor at midday. These moments mattered more than people admitted at the time, but they remembered them later. You arrange your day around these pauses, not lazily but intentionally. You work until chill creeps in, then stop just long enough to reclaim warmth. Then you move again. This rhythm preserves strength and spirit. There is continuing discussion among historians about whether settlers recognized the psychological importance of these small comforts or simply enjoyed them without reflection. The evidence suggests they noticed their effect even if they did not name it. Morale mattered especially when days blurred together. You sit near the fire and listen to its quiet sounds. Not the crackle of fresh logs, but the low whisper of embers shifting. That sound signals stability. It means no urgent action is required. Your shoulders relax when you hear it. A curious winter habit recorded in several journals describes people warming tools before using them, not just for practicality, but because holding something warm eased the mind. Even a knife or spoon could become a source of comfort when heat was scarce. You notice how scent plays a role. The smell of wood smoke broth, warm fabric. These smells signal safety now. They tell your body it is allowed to rest. Cold air outside smells sharp and empty by comparison. Some scholars still examine how repetitive winter routines affected mental resilience. Repetition can dull or soothe depending on context. In winter, it often soothed. Familiar actions reduced uncertainty, which conserved energy. You take a moment to sit in silence, not because there is nothing to do, but because doing nothing for a few minutes feels earned. This stillness is different from earlier in the season. It is not dangerous now. It is restorative. You warm your feet near the hearth and feel the ache fade. Feet hold more cold than you realize. Settlers paid close attention to them, knowing numb toes led to missteps and injury. Warm feet meant safer movement. There is debate among researchers about how often people allowed themselves these pauses versus pushing through exhaustion. Accounts vary. Those who rested strategically tended to fare better. Endurance without rest burned out quickly. You prepare the evening meal, slowly savouring the heat rising from the pot. Steam fogs your face. For a moment, the world is only warmth and smell and quiet bubbling. Time stretches pleasantly. A small but telling detail from winter letters mentions people saving the last warm drink of the day for just before bed, treating it like a ritual. The warmth carried into sleep easing the night. You do the same now. As darkness settles, you adjust bedding and feel the materials respond. Straw shifts, feathers loft, fabric holds heat. These textures are familiar now. They comfort through repetition. You lie down and listen to the shelter settle around you. The creak of wood cooling, the soft sound of breath, the faint warmth still lingering where you last sat. These details fade gently rather than sharply. Outside, winter continues its long hold. Inside, you have learned that comfort does not need to be abundant to be effective. It only needs to arrive at the right moment. Tomorrow, you will listen more closely to the sounds of winter nights, learning how cold announces itself after dark. For now, you let small comforts carry you into sleep, steady and warm enough to rest. Night has its own language in winter, and by now you understand most of it. You do not need to see the cold to know what it is doing. You hear it. You feel it in vibrations, in pauses, in the way familiar sounds change once the sun is gone. You lie awake for a moment after settling in, not from worry, but from habit. Listening has become part of staying warm. The shelter speaks softly as it cools. Wood contracts with small dry clicks. These sounds are normal, reassuring even. They mean the structure is adjusting, not failing. The wind sounds different at night. During the day, it moves with purpose. At night, it prowls. It slides along walls, testing seams you have already sealed. You recognize the difference between a harmless gust and a draft that needs attention. Experience has tuned your ear. Winter accounts often mention how settlers judged temperature by sound alone. Snowfall muffled everything. Clear, bitter nights made noises carry farther and sharper. A quiet night often meant insulation was working. A noisy one demanded inspection. You hear the fire breathing under ash. A faint shift, a soft collapse of embers. That sound tells you how long warmth will last. Too active and fuel is being wasted. Too quiet and the fire may be fading too fast. Tonight, it sounds balanced. There remains debate among historians about how much people truly slept through winter nights versus waking frequently to check fires and conditions. Many records suggest fragmented sleep was common. Warmth was monitored even in rest. Survival blurred the line between sleeping and watching. You notice how your breathing sounds different in cold, slower, deeper. Each exhale warms the space just a little. In shared sleeping arrangements, this collective breathing mattered. The room filled with a soft, steady rhythm that held heat gently. A curious detail from winter journals describes people identifying approaching storms by sound at night. A distant roar, a sudden stillness, ice cracking far away. These cues allowed preparation before daylight. Night listening became a skill. You hear animals shift nearby. Straw rustles, a hoof scrapes. These sounds are comforting. Living warmth is still present. Animals do not sleep deeply in extreme cold. Their awareness adds another layer of security. You listen for dripping. That sound is dangerous. Melt means moisture. Moisture means cold later. Tonight, there is none. The snow outside remains solid, insulation holds. Some scholars continue to explore how night vigilance affected mental states. Did constant listening increase anxiety, or did familiarity reduce fear? Accounts suggest that understanding night sounds transformed them from threats into information. Knowledge calmed the mind. You shift slightly in bed and hear fabric whisper. Blankets move without releasing much heat. This too is learned. Sudden movements invite cold. Slow adjustments preserve warmth. The wind fades for a while. Silence settles. In winter, silence is rarely empty. It feels full padded, as if the world itself is holding its breath. Snow does this. It wraps sound and softens edges. You remember early in the season how silence made you uneasy. Now it reassures you. Silence means no storm surge, no structural strain, no sudden change. It means the shelter and the night have reached an agreement. A small but memorable note from a settler's diary mentions counting heartbeats during long winter nights to stay calm. Listening inward instead of outward, the body provided rhythm when the world went quiet. You do the same now briefly. Breath, pause, breath. Warmth settles deeper with each cycle. The body knows how to rest when it feels safe. You hear a distant sound, maybe a tree shedding snow, maybe ice shifting. It is far enough away not to matter. You note it and let it go. Not every sound requires response. Winter teaches discernment. There is ongoing discussion among researchers about how night listening influenced later storytelling traditions. Long winter nights sharpened awareness and imagination. Sounds became stories, lessons, warnings passed along. Your eyelids grow heavy. Listening becomes less effortful, more like drifting. Sounds blur gently. Fire, breath, wind held back by walls you trust. Outside, winter speaks in its low, steady voice. Inside, you have learned to understand it without fear. The night no longer feels like something to endure. It feels like a phase you move through, guided by sound and warmth and quiet confidence. Tomorrow, you will reflect on how different modern warmth feels by comparison, and what has been gained and lost. For now, you let the night speak softly, and you listen just long enough to fall asleep. At some point, usually late at night or early in the morning, your mind drifts somewhere unexpected. Not back to summer, but forward. Forward to a world where warmth arrives without effort. You imagine a turn of a dial, a quiet hum, heat filling a room evenly and without smoke. The thought feels almost unreal now. You notice how different your relationship with warmth has become. Here, heat is specific, local. It comes from places, fire, bodies, suns, walls. In the modern world, you remember warmth is everywhere at once, invisible, effortless. You realize how rarely people think about where it comes from. It is a commonly accepted historical observation that the widespread adoption of modern heating dramatically reshaped daily life architecture and even social behavior. Homes grew larger, rooms spread apart. Winter lost much of its authority. Heat stopped dictating movement and routine. You contrast that with your day here. Every decision is shaped by temperature. Where you sit, when you move, how long you rest. Warmth is never abstract. It is always earned, measured, protected. You imagine explaining this to someone from the future, how firelight determines bedtime, how a single draft can change a night, how silence means insulation is working. The contrast feels vast. There is still discussion among historians about whether modern heating made people more comfortable or more disconnected from seasonal rhythms. Some argue it improved health and longevity. Others suggest it dulled awareness of environment. Both perspectives hold weight. You smile faintly at a curious thought recorded in an old letter, where a settler speculated that future generations might forget what cold truly felt like. They wrote it half joking, half wistful. Standing here now, you realize they were not wrong. You feel how attentive you have become. Every sensation registers. Warmth is felt fully because it is not constant. Comfort is meaningful because it is temporary. You wonder if modern warmth, always present, loses something by being guaranteed. Some scholars debate whether hardship deepens appreciation or simply exhausts it. Winter living offers evidence for both. There are moments of deep gratitude. There are moments of bone-tired frustration. Endurance sharpens perception, but demands its price. You think about architecture again. Modern homes hide their systems behind walls. Heat arrives silently. Here everything is visible. Fire burns openly. Insulation is touchable. Warmth announces itself. With sound and smell, there is no mystery to it. A small but telling anecdote from early industrial cities describes people initially distrusting centralized heating opening windows in winter because the steady warmth felt unnatural. Bodies had to relearn how to live without constant adjustment. You stretch slightly and feel the familiar layers respond. Clothing still matters. Bedding still holds heat. Even if modern warmth existed here, you suspect you would still keep these habits. Once learned, they linger. There is ongoing academic debate about whether modern heating reduced community dependence, when each room can be heated independently. People scatter. In winter settlements like yours, gathering was essential. Warmth drew people together physically and socially. You reflect on how silence feels different now, compared to a heated, modern home. There is no mechanical hum, no background noise, only natural sounds. Warmth here is quiet but not empty. It breathes. You imagine returning to modern warmth someday and feeling strangely overstimulated. Too much heat, too little variation. No reason to move or plan. The idea feels comforting and unsettling at once. You settle back and let the comparison fade. Thinking too far ahead steals warmth from the present. Winter living teaches focus. What matters is this night, this fire, this breath. Some historians argue that while modern heating improved survival, it also erased a deep form of environmental literacy. People once read cold the way sailors read tides. That knowledge is rare now. Standing here, you feel both the loss and the relief. You listen to the shelter and feel contentment settle. Not joy, exactly. Something quieter, acceptance, warmth enough to rest, knowledge enough to feel safe. Tomorrow, winter will reach its most difficult stretch, when nights feel endless and hope thins. For now, you let the modern world drift away and remain here grounded in a kind of warmth that demands attention but gives meaning in return. There is a point in winter when nights feel impossibly long, as if darkness has decided to linger, just to see how you will respond. You wake and sleep and wake again, unsure how much time has passed. Firelight flickers low. The world outside remains frozen in place. This is the stretch people remembered most clearly, the part they spoke of years later, with a quiet shake of the head. You feel it in your body first. Fatigue that no single night of rest can erase, muscles that warm more slowly each morning. The cold itself has not grown stronger, but your reserves have thinned. Winter knows when to press hardest. Many historical records suggest that the deepest part of winter, often late January or February in northern regions, was the most psychologically demanding period. Supplies still had to last. Spring remained distant. Hope existed, but it required effort to maintain. You light the fire carefully, coaxing rather than commanding. Flames rise reluctantly, as if tired too. You feed them patience instead of force. Rushing now would waste what you cannot replace. There is still discussion among historians about whether this phase of winter caused more accidents than earlier storms. Some evidence points to exhaustion as a key factor. People misjudged distances, forgot steps, let vigilance slip for just a moment. Cold punished mistakes swiftly. You move more slowly today, not from weakness but from wisdom. Energy conserved is warmth preserved. You have learned this lesson deeply now. Everything unnecessary is set aside. A small but striking detail from winter diaries describes people counting not days but nights. Nights were the true measure of endurance. Anyone could survive a cold day with movement. Night demanded preparation, trust, and restraint. You check bedding again, pressing straw, smoothing fabric. Even familiar materials need reassurance now. You add one more layer even if it feels excessive. This is not the time to gamble. Outside, the sky remains low and colourless. Snow reflects what little light there is, making the world feel suspended between day and night. You stop trying to judge time by the sun. Instead, you follow routine. Some scholars still debate whether rituals became more important during this phase of winter. Evidence suggests they did. Familiar actions grounded people when uncertainty grew heavy. Routine became an anchor. You prepare food slowly, deliberately. Warmth from the pot steadies you. The smell fills the room and lifts your mood just enough. Small comforts matter most now. You sit near the fire and allow yourself to rest without guilt. This is not laziness, it is preservation. Winter demands respect for limits. There is an old winter saying, recorded in letters from several regions, that if you can make it past the longest nights, you will make it through the year. You hold on to that thought quietly. You lie down earlier tonight, conserving energy. The fire is banked carefully. Stones are placed just right. Animals settle nearby. Everything is arranged to minimize loss. You listen to the night again. It feels heavier now, but familiar. You know its sounds. You know its patterns. Fear has little room to grow in knowledge. As you drift towards sleep, you allow yourself one small moment of anticipation. Not spring itself, but the subtle shift that comes before it. Longer light, slightly softer mornings, signs too small to celebrate, yet but enough to endure. Outside, winter holds on stubbornly. Inside, you have learned how to hold on just as firmly, using warmth, patience, and quiet resilience. Tomorrow will bring the first hints of change, even if you cannot feel them yet. For now, you rest in the longest night, knowing you are prepared, and that preparation is what carries you through. You notice it before anyone says it out loud. The night is still cold, but it feels different. Not warmer exactly, just less sharp. The darkness lifts a little sooner. Morning light lingers where it once vanished quickly. Winter has not ended, but it has loosened its grip. You wake and listen, as you always do. The shelter creaks less aggressively. Snow outside sounds heavier, wetter. Somewhere in the distance, water moves under ice. These are not dramatic signs, but they are unmistakable. Change has begun. Historical observations across many regions note that early settlers recognized the coming of spring long before temperatures truly rose. They watched animals first, slight shifts in behavior, restlessness, changes in appetite. These signs mattered more than dates on a calendar. You step outside briefly and feel the air. It still bites, but it does not linger on your skin the same way. The cold releases faster. This small mercy feels enormous. You do not celebrate yet. Winter has taught you caution, but hope feels safer now. There remains discussion among historians about how quickly settlers allowed themselves to relax once signs of thaw appeared. Some accounts suggest people maintained strict winter routines until warmth was undeniable. Others describe cautious optimism creeping in gradually. You choose the middle path, prepared but aware. Inside, you begin undoing some of the changes made at winter's peak. Not all at once, just a little. A fabric panel loosened. A shutter opened slightly longer during the day. The room breathes again. A curious detail from early spring accounts describes people sitting quietly in doorways during the first mild days, letting fresh air touch their faces without rushing. After months of sealing themselves in, this felt almost ceremonial. You feel gratitude now, not relief exactly, but recognition. Every choice made over the winter mattered. Fire tended carefully, beds layered properly, bodies shared warmth, insulation adjusted again and again. These actions carried you here. Some scholars continue to debate whether surviving winter fundamentally changed settlers' outlook on life. Evidence suggests it did. Endurance reshaped priorities, comfort was redefined, warmth was never taken for granted again. You prepare the fire differently now. Smaller, less urgent, more symbolic. It is no longer a lifeline, but a companion winding down with the season. Fuel anxiety eases slightly. You lie down one last time under heavy winter bedding and feel contentment settle in. Not joy, not triumph. Something quieter, satisfaction. You did not conquer winter. You learned to live with it. Outside, the cold still exists, but it no longer feels endless. Inside, warmth has done its work. And now as the story slows, you let your body rest in that same way. You are no longer chopping ceiling counting, you are just breathing. The shelter fades softly around you. Firelight dims, sounds grow distant. The details that once demanded attention release you gently. Muscles loosen, breath deepens. You imagine warmth not as something you chase, but as something that stays with you. A memory held in the body, a quiet confidence that you can endure discomfort when needed. Your thoughts drift more slowly now. The night stretches, but it no longer feels heavy. It feels calm, safe enough to sleep. You let the final images blur, earth holding steady beneath you, walls standing firm, fire resting, winter easing its hold. Your breathing becomes the only sound that matters. Slow, even, warm. You are carried forward not by effort now, but by rest. Sweet dreams.